We're in the committee hall meeting of Tuesday, March 21st, and we're meeting on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. We have an agenda for council, looking for a motion to adopt the agenda, moved by Councillor Krause, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor, opposed, motion carries. First up, 3.1, we have Kara Triance from the RCMP here to talk about strategic priorities for the coming year. Welcome.
Thank you.
And please, this is a committee meeting, so anyone is welcome to join the conversation. You can come sit at the table or put your hand up and come sit at the table.
And I'm just going to point out right now that I have my back to you guys, so I'm going to depend on this group to make sure that you guys are involved in the conversation as much as you want to be. And please, we certainly welcome your input. So I will face this way so I can see my presentation, but don't hesitate to speak up.
Everyone's welcome to come to the table and participate.
Great. So for those of you who I haven't met, Kara Triance, I'm the officer in charge of Sea to Sky RCMP detachment, and I've been here since December. The RCMP, every year we engage in strategic planning. We call it an annual performance plan if it's set annually. If it's a strategic plan, we try and stretch it out, which is an ultimate long-term goal for myself in Sea to Sky. But this year, getting my feet on the ground, understanding community issues, I've tried to balance priorities, and what I think is the most appropriate this year is to engage in a one-year strategic plan or annual performance plan. And our purpose today is just to get together and ensure I can hear from you guys what your priorities are for your community, as well as involve you in some discussion and feedback on kind of where I think we should be, the direction that I think we should be going. So really important for us within the RCMP, we set priorities nationally, and we set them divisionally within E-Division, and then here locally within the Sea to Sky area, and specific objectives for Squamish and the community itself. And so part of my obligation to you is engagement, this external consultation, which I've learned hasn't happened in quite the formalized manner in the past, and so I appreciate you guys being willing to adapt this and consider this. This is something that I think is extremely meaningful. And going forward, I will welcome your input and suggestions on whether or not we report quarterly, every 6 months, on how we're doing with some of the goals that we kind of arrive at from today. So I have a PowerPoint here. There's some notes up there just because I felt like I wanted to give you guys some things. Those of you who are visual, I, as you know, am also just somebody who really likes to have a discussion on issues. So the PowerPoint's going to be there for those who want some key points to refer to visually, but I'm not somebody who does the death by PowerPoint and really speaks to it. So I will be kind of blasting through some of the slides. But our purpose today is to get out of here after the end of the day with really clear objectives on where we want to go for 2017, 2018, and allow me to effectively place my resources, whether it be in my plainclothes units or my support sections, our youth section, our general duty policing, and really give our officers a focus on what they should be doing with their unallocated time. So when they're not responding to calls for service, what do they do with their time? What we like to say now in the RCMP, and what's been said to me in the past, is gone are the days where we drive around in circles in our police car and try and interrupt the break and enter in progress. We try now and interdict ahead of time using intelligence gathering, using crime stats, and some strategic focus on what the community issues are. We try and deal with interdiction of crime, but also prevention of crime through really strategic measures that are pre-planned. So brings us to what the RCMP would like to do nationally and kind of how they've built a vision for our organization. It's called the Results and Respect Model. It's the Commissioner's kind of guiding principles on how to formulate your strategic plan. I like to think of it as a balance between our desire to achieve results and how we're going to get there, while ensuring that we're respecting all of the people out there. So results at no cost is not going to be where we want to get, in my opinion. If you're looking to just reach a measurable, tangible outcome of, let's say, less substance abuse within the community, results at no cost, while not respecting the people, is not a suitable outcome, in my opinion. If we have tangible outcomes that support police operations, but also where our communities feel supported and engaged and are part of the outcome, then we're going to get to the place that I think is a more lasting, measurable solution. Just the ultimate goal of making sure that Canadians in our community feel safe. So if we look at specifically BC, so that's the commissioner coming from Ottawa saying results and respect model is how I want you to formulate your strategic plan. And then we look at the organization here in BC. They've set out a strategic plan from 2014 to 2017. It was a 3-year strategic plan under the previous commanding officer. Many of you might have heard that we had a new commanding officer appointed in the beginning of March. Her name is Brenda Butterworth-Carr. She's our deputy commissioner. She was previously our assistant commissioner, and she is of Indigenous background. She's a female from the Yukon Territory and an extensive amount of operational policing background. So thrilled to have her as our commanding officer. And I do anticipate that at the end of 2017, she'll be setting new strategic goals, and that's why I'm really excited about us having a 1-year plan, as we can kind of align with her goals and her plans for all of BC if we set a 3-year strategic plan next year. So this year, and at the end of our 2017 year here, the previous commanding officer has three really clear priorities. His is a 40-page document that was outlined really with specific measurable goals. I've summed it up into one slide here for you, and I'm really well versed in that plan, but would like to just kind of hit the key points here. So he was really clear on our goal was to ensure public safety by reducing crime and violence, with the ultimate goal of people feeling safe. So less crime, a sense of security, and a high level of trust in the RCMP. Under that, there was a ton of different initiatives around reducing violence, around improving service delivery to our community. They also had 2 kind of more administrative and employee engagement priorities, and that's the fiscal accountability, so making sure that our communities that are paying for policing resources are getting what they are paying for, as well as figuring out ways to streamline. One of the things that's bogging down our police officers is the administrative work that we're doing. We've advanced with technology, but not necessarily in administration. And so we are working on bringing that up to speed. I think a lot of good work has been done in that area, but that's getting police officers out on the street doing police work more often than stuck doing paperwork. And then modernization, that's the last one, and that is bringing our crime stats and our crime information that informs us on our policing and our policing operations, bringing that up to a modernized level so that we can create safer communities and do that in an informed way. So those are kind of the 3 priorities for BC. And when I look at those, I really kind of use those as guiding principles to formulate some decisions that would help us arrive at where we want to get to today, and that's a strategic plan. So what I do want to do quickly is recap kind of what our crime stats are in our community here, as well as what we've been doing for the previous couple of years. As I mentioned, I was new to Sea to Sky Detachment in December. We had a previous officer in charge who set these strategic priorities and priority issues and key activities in the preceding years. And for those of you who don't know, and many of you already are aware that I'm pregnant and going to be on maternity leave in June, we've brought in a secondment for my position who will be starting mid-May. And his name is Inspector Jeff Christie. He comes from our operational strategy branch. I've had a chance to meet with him, and I'm thrilled that he's going to be in this position for a year. In Ops Strategy Branch,
It's
It's okay, I'm just wondering if you want to take questions per slide, or if you want to wait till the end.
You know what, we're going to have lots of time for discussion.
I think we're
Yeah,
going to
okay,
have
awesome.
deliberative dialogue,
I'm good
so
to
we'll let
Yeah.
Karen finish.
I've only got 3 more slides here, and then it's going to be full time to discuss. And so I'll just kind of get this information out, and then we've got lots of information, or lots of time to
Sorry to
just,
interrupt you.
no, not at all. Yeah, so just really thrilled about Jeff Christie coming and his role. He is, he's able to support me in the vision that I have for our community and for our communities as a whole. I'm really working towards an integrated model of policing, as well as needs specific to the community. And he's thrilled to collaborate with me on this. So Ops Strategy Branch is Ops Strategy Branch is a unit that works on communication and strategic planning full-time. They do a lot of work in this area, and so I'm hoping to engage his expertise in meeting together and setting a 3-year plan that is more involved and has input from the community. So after today, I'd like to set a 1-year plan. We come up with a 1-year plan, and we can revisit this throughout the year and see where we're going. and then evolve that into something that we could work at in a bigger picture over 3 years, aligned with where the district wants to go. So our previous OIC was really focused on substance abuse, youth crime, reducing property crime, road safety, and building and maintaining positive relations within our community. And under that, you can see that each of those have specific activities. So when we talk about substance abuse and drug enforcement, it was targeting individual trafficking drugs with a focus on our prolific offenders. Youth crime, preventing and reducing youth involvement in crime with an emphasis on our DARE program. And then reducing property crime, develop and manage a prolific offender program to prevent property crimes, reducing fatalities through traffic enforcement, and then building enhanced communication with our external partners. So 5 issues that have kind of been focused on. I could get into a lot of different details around that, but I think what is important for me is looking at where we currently are with our crime analysis, and then looking at sort of what structure we have in place and where I think, having met with my supervisors and the community partners that I've met with, what a proposed direction could be. This is a slide with a lot of numbers. I apologize, when we talk about death by PowerPoint, I think this is it right here in the summary. So I'm gonna just try and kind of cap it up. But what we've got is in 2016, we had a total of 8,726 files for all of Squamish municipality. That is pretty much on par with 2015. You can see there's not much of a change since 2015. When I pick out the key points from those crime stats, when we look at violent crime, we saw approximately a 10% decrease in violent offenses. Keeping in mind, when we talk about violent offenses, we're talking about domestic violence or intimate partner violence, sexual violence, violence that might be happening overtly in the bars or the streets or in a robbery type fashion. All of those things don't necessarily result in reportable offenses. Domestic violence, if you're doing a really good job engaging your community in domestic violence issues, you might be actually you might see your stats go up because you're building relationships with an at-risk and vulnerable population. Same with sexual assault, you are accessing your victim services and your community programs. You might see people have more trust in the police and be willing to come forward and report that. But what we saw was approximately a 10% decrease in reported violent offenses. We saw, and so these stats, I should clarify, these are police files. This isn't a independent review through any sort of research project. This is just police files, so reported offenses. Property crime, we saw 880 property crime offenses, which is a positive, an increase in property offenses. Generally speaking, we see property crime offenses reported to the police. People call us when their house is broken into, when their vehicle has been broken into, or their bikes have been stolen. So we're seeing a slight increase in that, nothing to be extremely alarmed by, and things that we can kind of get under, I believe that we can get under wraps here, but definitely seeing it go up a little bit. Substance abuse, so I hate to call this an offense because I believe it's a social issue that we need to deal with in that manner, but I put it in there as an offense code because we categorize files that might impact people's decision-making and or result in criminal offenses. And so if we look at intoxicated in public, we can see a slight decrease since 2015, but 136 files where the police were called to people intoxicated in public. We see a decrease in enforcement in the area of marijuana, and with cocaine possession, we see an increase. And there was definitely a focus on the police to try and deal with people trafficking drugs with a focus on our hard substances. A lot of great work being done in that area in terms of trying to deal with our trafficking offenses, but we didn't have a huge focus or component on the psychosocial issues. So I throw that out there for kind of just an observation point. Road safety, total of 431 collisions. You can see over the last year, Squamish had 2 fatal collisions. And we had a decrease in impaired driving offenses. So even though we were targeting impaired driving, we saw a decrease by 25% in impaired driving. Some of you may know, others may not, that we are supported within Squamish area with the integrated traffic safety unit. So a traffic services that is placed in Squamish detachment. They're provincially funded, not municipally funded, and their primary focus is the highway between Lions Bay and Pemberton. So they are the ones who are supporting the work of our general duty police officers on the highway. And we have a municipal traffic position that focuses on our municipality, so our areas around the school zones, our area around downtown, etc. We have one person there, and then the rest of it is also managed within what we call our provincial policing responsibility of our general duty police officers. They're expected to contribute to enforcement of our provincial statutes, which is the Motor Vehicle Act, and they're expected to conduct enforcement. So there's a team effort there. Traffic safety reports to an officer in charge down in the Lower Mainland District. They will have a continued strategic focus going forward on reducing fatalities and focusing on impaired infractions on the highway. I like to separate that because what we are really going to be focusing here is what to do with our general duty and our Squamish resources, whether or not we want to look at road safety and supporting what the traffic services are doing, or if we want to kind of carve off our own piece of things and look at what we're doing within our detachment area here with our general duty police officers. Last thing I included in there was mental health. It's a key issue for policing right now. It's a key issue for our communities. We had 15 mental health apprehensions, meaning that people were apprehended by the police and taken to the hospital. Since 2015, this is a 25% increase. So in 2016, we saw a 25% increase in mental health apprehensions. Just a quick recap for anybody who isn't aware, Squamish Detachment, while supported by the Greater Sea to Sky RCMP area, has police officers assigned to Squamish area, and in that there is a zone commander, so Jolene Percival, who many of you know, she's the staff sergeant in charge. Reporting directly under her and in charge of operations is Gareth Bradley. He's a resident of this community and is been for a long, long time. His wife is a teacher here, and he's just newly promoted into the sergeant role, and his job is all things operations, so policing. And reporting to him is 3 watch commanders. They are in charge of the watches. We provide a 24/7 policing response, and underneath each of those watch commanders is a 4-person watch. So 24/7, we have 5 police officers on. You can consider 1 to be away on training or leave at any time, and 4 on the road. So 4 police officers on the road when we are thinking about responding to police issues within our community. There's 4 police officers on the road, supported by a school liaison officer, a traffic constable, what we call the Integrated First Nations Unit. It's a provincially funded position, and their primary mandate is a relationship with our First Nations people and our First Nations communities. And then an 8-person integrated plainclothes section, which has got 2 Squamish funded positions in it, and they respond to all of Sea to Sky. They're truly an integrated section, and they are doing a great job balancing the needs of all of the communities that we police, and they're that overarching one. So last slide here, last thing I want to kind of pitch at you guys is we met as a team of supervisors from all of Sea to Sky, so Whistler, Pemberton, Squamish, Bowen, and we sat down and talked about what are the issues that are hitting our communities, where do we see ourselves going this year, what does our community want to see us doing, and kind of came up with an idea of what we thought would work, how we could align with both the RCMP's national and provincial initiatives. And then we're here today to kind of look through some of these issues, look at what's achievable, look at what we could do, align with the directions of our partner agencies and our community, and see if we want to add anything to what's up here, take anything away from what's up here, throw new topics up. This is a chance for us to hear from everybody outside of our office on what we should be focusing our police resources on. Where do you guys want to spend your dollars on policing? Where do you want to see your police focus their time and energy? So after today, my goal is to return to the office, formulate a plan for the next year, have a really clear picture of what the priority issues are, and be able to come up with some meaningful, measurable, tangible outcomes that we can look at and evaluate throughout the year, and that I can report back to you on. So what we came up with, as you can see, is crime reduction, so focusing still on that, reducing property crime. I think bike thefts, theft from autos, break-and enters really impact our general population. That is something we can kind of formulate plans to meet through education as well as through enforcement. I'd like to see us continue to focus on reducing violent crime, really specifically with that enhancing how the community feels around safety. I think two key issues, but don't need to be the only issues. We can talk more about that, but I think the two key issues that we have not put a lot of time and energy into is sexual violence and domestic violence. And I'd like to see our officers building engagement in our partner agencies, working and collaborating with our partner agencies, and seeing how we can explore this. I caveat this and warn this that this will likely produce an increase in stats. In other communities that I've worked in that we've focused on this, we've seen the stats go up. So we don't want to get stat focused here in terms of number of crimes, but we do want to see kind of reporting and what we can do to engage the community on that. And the last one is being an enhanced service delivery to our at-risk and vulnerable population. This is such a big umbrella. We could do so much under this, and I think it's an area we could grow and develop. But when I think about our at-risk and vulnerable population, to me that's our youth, that's people who have substance abuse issues, that's our Indigenous communities, that is any group that would kind of fit under that vulnerable category. And I think if we kind of look at some of our psychosocial policing issues and try and build from there, what I ultimately could see being a full-time position of a social risk coordinator, that's the best name I could come up with in this. I would like to see us build into a police officer that is engaging our community groups, who's kind of a center management piece for all of these files that involve that at-risk and vulnerable population. We have some unsolved homicides specifically in Squamish area that are old, that have task lists associated to them, and we have simply not carved off the time to dedicate to these homicides. And I believe that these missing persons or homicide files could come to successful resolution for some of those families. I've looked at a few of them, and I'm confident that if I set aside time for our police officers to work on that, they could further some of those investigations, and I think that that is something to consider in our planning. As well as looking at some of our downtown or our on reserve, our homeless population, some of those communities that could use time and energy where we are responding to policing concerns, but not necessarily collaborating with our stakeholders and the people who could. And I'm not saying that there's not an outstanding amount of great work. I feel like I'm being a bit critical here, but there's an outstanding amount of great work being done by the police officers to already collaborate. I think that they're pulled in a lot of directions right now, and I would like to give them the time and the direction and the energy and the leadership to say, this is where I want to see you put your time and energy. Here's where your focus is going to be. That's it for me.
Awesome. So maybe what we'll do at the beginning is if there's any questions, like without getting into the debate necessarily, or even just want to, for clarification purposes, and I just have a few. Can you go back and please let me know if anyone else has any questions? Can you go to the stats page?
Yes.
And this has always been a bit of a challenging one because we have this dual, provincial function, municipal function. We have a lot of stuff happens on the highway. It would be helpful, and I know you can't do this on the fly right now. If you
I might be able to. I brought some stats.
It would be really interesting to know, especially on particular things like theft from car. Are they happening in provincial parks? Impaired driving, is that mostly on the highways? That internal only? It'd be interesting to understand the effect that Squamish Valley Music Festival didn't have on last year, because didn't happen last year. So to understand if it does increase some of the substance abuse and or some of the violent crime aspects. So I'm not sure how to.
So I can speak a little bit broadly to some of those questions. What you see presented right there is Squamish municipality, so not our provincial areas.
So none of that's highway related or provincial park related.
So I'm going to get the actual boundaries right now to you for this one if you know it. Can you speak to is it the Orange Bridge to the...
Come on up, because you can't speak unless you're at the table, because it's microphone.
So Ashley's our GS section. She's going to need to leave early. She's got some interviews this afternoon.
Welcome.
But and you might not know the answer to this one, so I'm just looking to you briefly if you do, but the jurisdiction would be police versus traffic services. Is it Orange Bridge?
It goes to Big Orange Bridge to Megan Creek, I believe it is. It's Megan Creek.
So that area would be considered our municipal police officers' responsibility?
So everything that happens between Big Orange Bridge and basically just north of Britannia Beach
Yes.
is in our municipality, even though the function of the highway is provincial.
Correct.
So
And so when we look at those 2 fatal collisions or those impaired driving infractions, it's either on the highway in that area or within the municipality.
Yeah, okay,
So
then,
so
it doesn't
separating
break it
those
out.
ones, I could
Yeah.
absolutely do, I don't have it at this point.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but it'd be good to really understand the influence that the provincial function of the highway is on having. The theft from vehicle would be really interesting to know if that, we know a lot of them happen in the parking lot up at Garibaldi Park and Shannon Falls and stuff. So it'd be good to really understand where those influences are happening and how we make sure we're allocating the time and the resources amongst all of the funders to figure out how to address those issues.
Ashley is an excellent person to have as a resource here because of your prolific offender role. Do you have any input on that?
I can just specifically say that we have identified those as hotspots, and we have targeted in the past, and we have seen a decrease in the property crime, specifically Shannon Park and Garibaldi, like you had mentioned. We identify who our property crime targets are, and we focus our energy on them until we see a drastic change in their behavior or court results, that sort of thing.
And do you know, with our prolific offenders, obviously, let's just kind of go across roughly 2 years, are we seeing most of them from Squamish, or are we seeing them coming up from the Lower Mainland?
It's a bit of both, actually. I can actually speak to a lot of our prolific offenders that we have worked on in the past. They have displaced themselves, so they've left Squamish. But with that, we're seeing new ones coming to Squamish. And usually we find that they're on their way to Whistler, or this is only a pit stop, but yet that's what they tell us, and then they continue to linger for a while.
And just it'd be interesting to pull out Squamish Valley stats from 2015 so we can really understand if we're reducing because we just don't have that one event that brings 40,000 people to town, just so we're not reacting to something
That happened
or
then?
thinking something's really changed when in fact the baseline's the same.
Yes.
So we could just make sure we did. Any other questions?
I should just
Yeah.
clarify too, so Laura is here from our office, she's one of our admin services, thank you
Hello.
Laura for being here, and she's making notes of some of these questions, so if we come out of this with things like you just identified, part of what Laura's doing is extracting information so that I can work on that in our plan, but also we have follow-up questions that we have from this. We have a crime analyst who will be able to pull this data for us, so isolating just the time around the Music Fest from the rest of the stats, she can do that information, so we'll get that as we go forward.
Yeah, so for clarification purposes, I don't want to get into debate necessarily yet, but I've got Susan, Peter, Ted.
What do we have currently as far as a domestic violence unit or a sexual assault worker with the RCMP? Do we actually have a position for victim services anymore?
We have a full-time victim services in our office. Jenna is outstanding. We're lucky to have her. And I'm gonna let Ashley speak to what we do in terms of domestic violence. And so I'm gonna preface this with, our office has, again, an integrated GIS section. That's like a plainclothes unit. Ashley works within that unit. She's able to speak a little bit more to what we do in terms of ICAT, and so our integrated case management for domestic violence and or sexual violence files. But interesting that you bring it up because we've talked about the need for carving off a domestic violence or sexual violence investigator specifically. What we have right now, with the resources we have right now, we can't carve off a unit for that, or a person, it would be really called a person within that unit. But certainly we have a desire to do that. We also understand that budget decisions have to be made and that we can't have everything we want. So we say that in that if we were to aspire to create a position, that's one down the road, but I couldn't say it was my first position that I would create, but it's certainly one that I would consider in the overall scheme of our resources. So Ashley can speak to kind of what we do in that capacity.
When we receive a domestic violence call, then ultimately general duty responds, and the supervisor looks at it before the action and just identifies key areas that need to be followed up on immediately, so it's passed on to the next shift. There's also a risk assessment done, so it's to ensure that that the victim is provided the necessary outreach that they need, whether it's victim services or if it's Ministry of Children and Families. So there's obvious supervisor oversight, and then with regards to sexual violence, then Again, if it's high risk or something that requires immediate action, then it's usually brought to my or one of my partners' attention, and we'll get involved and offer some oversight with it as well. The sexual violence one, it takes a collaborative effort between both General and GIS, and often we mentor and share the tasks that are associated to the files.
Can I just follow up?
Yep.
Is there a possibility that we don't have RCMP, that we have a ride-along mental health service or sexual assaults that is a community-oriented outreach worker?
Let's get into that whole conversation. I just want a
I don't know if
clarification.
that's even possible.
Yeah, I think that's a great conversation. I just thought we'd get all the clarification stuff and then we can get into the service augmentation, service strategic stuff. So just a little hold, so there's clarification purposes, so we can make sure we're founding the debate and the discussion on the same assumptions. Thanks. Susan.
Just a question, your theft from auto and property crime, et cetera, do you find that tied directly to drugs?
Oh, yeah.
What's the
I
correlation?
keep
there?
diverting, but
Yeah.
just my real on the ground.
Sorry, just coming to mind, like, most definitely.
Yeah.
I can speak kind of nationally and provincially on that issue. We see that on repeat as one of the issues. So here, actually saying, yes, we're also seeing it here, but I can tell you that generally those crimes are fueled by a need for substance, fueling that substance addiction. And the people that we're arresting who are breaking into vehicles are breaking in indiscriminately to, say, 13 to 14 vehicles in a night. Not necessarily in this community 13 to 14 in a night, but they will hit and target 14 vehicles in a night. They'll get enough money to have a fix or to be able to fund whatever debt that they've got going on, and then quick turnover of that property. We don't see that property, even if they're arrested several days later, that property has been sold almost immediately, and then onwards.
So,
Is that accurate for what we're seeing locally as well? Yeah.
if I may, and the drugs, I noticed on your slide you talk about cocaine. Is there, what other drugs are we seeing in the community aside from cannabis, hard drugs?
On some wood, knock on wood, we are fortunate so far that we have not seen fentanyl hit our communities. That's a question that comes up fairly frequently. We're at the process right now of wrapping up a project, actually north of here, but that has produced some great results. And I'll let you just speak to that.
Sure, we're specifically targeting the dealers, not so much, the chronic dealers and how they're affecting and impacting the Whistler Village. So yeah, we saw some good results and have identified and established intelligence to further our investigation after this project is complete.
So the stuff that they're stealing, there must be fencing it locally somewhere then, right?
You'd be surprised, there's actually a lot that goes down to the city,
Really?
and if they're fencing it locally, it's a lot,
Keep going.
there might be more chance to get it back and to the owner, but once it goes down to the
Right,
city,
yeah.
the net is so large that it's difficult to.
That was sort of my gist with that. Thanks.
Yeah. Councilor Pryor? clarification?
I was questioning that fentanyl stuff too, so I'm good for now. Thanks.
Any other questions for clarification? And anyone is obviously welcome to participate in the conversation. We'll start off with Susan.
Thanks. I'm just looking for better integration, as always, with the community and policing, and I think it's really, first of all, the work that you're doing, bringing up psychosocial issues from the RCMP. It's such a refreshing thing to hear and an amazing thing to hear. I think that having that integration with council as well, what we can control is land use, and if there's land use issues that need addressing that are high crime areas or light issues or things that we can do, it'd be amazing to have better integration throughout the year with that. Specialized victim services is something that I'm really concerned with. I tend to hear a lot. I've been sending more and more people to the RCMP, and I think that what I've been hearing is that it's so much better for them right now reporting. And I look forward to statistics going up because it means we're doing something well and that people are feeling comfortable with reporting those issues. I wonder if we could have a community member that is specifically engaged in mental health or sexual assault, who comes with the RCMP if there are reporting there are people that are reporting, or if that would help the RCMP in dealing with that expertise, or how we create that expertise within our units.
So this is kind of, many of you have heard of CAR 40, I think it's called CAR 60, there's a few different terms for it in different communities, but it's a social worker who rides in a police vehicle with the police officer. They're both security cleared, they're cleared to attend calls for service together, and their primary purpose is to pick off calls for service and/or focus on proactive work with individuals they know in the community have mental health issues or substance abuse issues, or a coupling of the two, and their job is to try and either get them the resources they need, help them to make the changes they need, or try and prevent them, put them in a situation that's safe enough that they are not making choices to commit crime in their community. So that's sort of their objective in those programs. We see them in the city of Kelowna, Vancouver, Surrey, some of our larger detachments where there's a lot of resources there, and they're dedicated teams that work together. I think there's so much value in this. I don't think we have a need for a full-time CAR 40 program here, or CAR 60, or whatever we want to call this particular collaboration of a social worker and a police officer. But I do see that we could have them working together on specific days of the week. So we form a team that is working together, and this is kind of where I look at this potential to grow. So if we were to focus on the service delivery to our at-risk and vulnerable population, and then grow this into what I believe could be a social risk coordinator, or a position that those two would team up in days of the week. So they might team up on, say, a Friday every other week, and then a Wednesday day every other week, or something along those lines, where they could once a week team up together and go and focus on their client group and see what they could do to deliver services. Do I think we have a 24/7 need where some communities have? No, I don't think we've got that, but I do see a team working together, say, once a week. I throw that out there really roughly, based on what information I have to the statistics at the time and what I'm observing, and then the feedback I'm getting from people in our communities. So the police officers who attend the library or the park, or where we are seeing issues where there's people frequenting with substance abuse and mental health issues, or the ones that we're attending in homes that could use the follow-up support in home. They might have work that they are currently doing with their losing the word, but like their mental health coordinator essentially, and then they are supported through Vancouver Coastal Health and through an at-home program, but that they could use that follow-up and outreach. Yeah.
So I know that, just to follow up with Susan's question, they introduced this in Surrey a couple years ago. Is there a report sort of evaluating the first couple years of this so we can really understand the positive effect of
Good
it?
question. My district officer, the person who's in charge of Lower Mainland District, was the previous OIC for Surrey. I'll reach out to him because he'll know the inception of the program as well as kind of where it's gotten.
If we could get to see that, that would be great.
Yeah.
And
Follow up?
just to follow up on that, I think a specialized victim services position as well, and that's usually funded through the province, but.
So we have a full-time victim services.
Right, but a specialized victim services is usually done through, done as a coordinator with the RCMP through like House on Women's Center, or through one of the outreach programs as well, but it would need advocacy from the community.
Yes.
And, you know, saying that, I always am concerned, you spoke to statistics, and we don't have statistics because people don't report.
Absolutely.
So without the need, and then if you have prevention, you also don't have the statistics because you have prevention. So I think it's prudent really to have services and know how much you're using those services before you can say, because at least if people are reporting, or if things they don't want to report but they need outreach worker, that full-on integration with the Women's Center and RCMP is so important. So
I agree.
I'm excited that you guys are on it this year.
I would consider those two crimes that I've identified under the reducing violent crime, sexual violence and domestic violence, as kind of behind closed doors crime that we don't often get reported. I think at one point, very early on in my policing career, I heard a PhD professor speak on sexual violence specifically and said, we believe at this point 2% of sexual violence files are reported to the police. So I throw that out there as just a number. It's old, it's something I've heard, but I think it's a very low number as reported. What I think we can do in this area is enhance what we know needs to get done. So better work at protecting women through collaboration with our service providers, and intimate partner violence, we know is an issue that affects children in our community. I'm actually speaking anecdotally from reading shift reports, but I would say that this community has quite a high number of domestic violence files reported, and we're seeing quite a high number. I think if I look at the last 3 months and reading shift reports day and night, that has to be an area we focus on. I would be disappointed if we walked out of here and carved domestic violence off of that based on what I'm seeing.
I don't think that's gonna happen.
I don't think so either. But I ultimately want to throw my opinion out there because I think that it's important in that anecdotally, that's what I'm seeing. I don't have anything to kind of support that outside of that. And I think that there's lots we can do there. I think we can build that program. So specialized, I just want to clarify for those who don't know, specialized versus victim services. We have a victim services worker in our office versus specialized victim services, which only focuses on intimate partner violence and sexual violence and providing those specific services. They're usually offered through a community program like House on Women's Society, one of those community-specific agencies, and they are provincially funded victim services. So initially the file might come into our RCMP victim services and then referred over to specialized, or it could come directly from the courts or the community to specialized, and they focus primarily on violence in relationships.
Yeah. Maybe, Christine, can you just remind everyone how we fund victim services? And would the specialized victim services be 100% provincial? And I know a couple years ago we thought about budgeting for another victim services and the provincial matching funding didn't come through, but just trying to understand how we can understand and then perhaps advocate for that role. How do we, just remind everyone, how do we fund victim services?
There is some provincial grant money that comes in for victim services, and that would fund any residual.
You don't know, can't remember the percentage?
Sorry, I don't, maybe Glenday remembers.
Okay.
So it's a fairly small,
I built a victim services program at one point and I still don't remember, so this was 2008. And I don't remember what percentage we got from the province versus, I almost want to say it was 100% at that point based on the specialized.
I can pull it up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand, and then, but this specialized victim services would be a function of the province through some Vancouver Coastal Health or Justice or somewhere,
Ministry of Public Safety.
which is Justice Department, right? So it would go to a nonprofit to provide those services.
Correct. What is good about that is it removes it from the police station, right? And not to say that Jenna, our victim services, she's outstanding and she works within
Yeah.
RCMP framework, but to move it outside of policing is kind of what they've achieved, and they don't have the same mandate as our RCMP victim services.
And one more question there, would that type of request to the province come through the nonprofit, or would it come through the municipality, or would a joint submission, or would it come through you to the province to say, we really want to focus on this, we think it'd be valuable to have a special victim services?
I think we would be engaging the province. I think we'd be going to Jordan Sturdy and saying, hi, this is what we're looking for.
As a group.
As a group, with a letter from myself, a letter from council, a letter from RCMP Victim Services. I would like, our RCMP Victim Services comes from a background of like having ICAT training, having, working in Sophie's Place, which is the Child Abuse Prevention Center and Violence Prevention Center in Surrey that's really well established, and I think that they would be able to provide some more updates. So I think I would almost park that and say I'll get back to you on victim services once I'm able to ask and answer more questions.
Thanks. Karen?
Yeah, thanks, Kara, for this. It's just a follow-up to the mental health ride-along sort of role. As I've been listening to presentations from other municipalities over the last few years, one of the things that struck me that would be helpful in a small community where we can't afford or we don't need a 24/7 sort of service,
Yeah.
was the active case management. So for those people that we know have both substance and mental health, or one or the other, but are sort of prolific call generators. Those communities had a team of RCMP, social workers, whoever, Vancouver Coastal Health, all sat down at a table. So everyone knew the plan if we got a call about this particular person, and there was a process, and it didn't matter who was on duty, everyone kind of knew what was going to happen. And I thought that would be really ideal in sort of this social risk coordinator to bring those community partners together to have that active case management in place of not having ride-alongs available.
I concur. It's so, like you said, it's in its infancy in the province kind of development of that position and that programming. But I think it's similar to what we saw in ICAT. So ICAT, for those who don't know, is that integrated case management for people in domestic violence relationships. And you bring together a probation officer, a police officer, a social worker, a victim services worker, all of the people, child and family development, any sort of support person that is important to have at that team, bring them together with the victim and start safety planning for that victim. So that's the ICAP process, and there is a safety plan in place that we can refer to every time there's an incident with the access to services and how we'll move forward in a safe manner, as well as dealing with the enforcement piece and the victim services piece. The same thing is growing, just as you're alluding to, in the mental health component. So you deal with the mental health issue through a team of people supporting this one individual, where the services center around the individual, and we bring the services to the individual to address what their individual needs are. So it might be that they need to go back and see their psychiatrist and meet with them for a revisit of their medication and a plan upon release from the hospital, and support services in place that are re-engaged to support them to transition back to their home. All of those kind of things are dealt with in that planning meeting and ready for when that fall happens, the police pick them up and bring them to the hospital. There's not a, oh, what do we do with them now plan in place. There's a plan. We do some of that stuff in isolation right now on isolated files, but not in a coordinated manner, because it really requires somebody who is looking at, okay, I've got this individual and not just this one file I attended, but here's the last 30 files we attended and here's what we've got. And where we could see that happening in a full-time role in cities, I think we could see that as one of the duties of, say, a social risk coordinator. I throw this out here, I've got this social risk coordinator in there right now. I'm going to be really clear about this. I do not have a police officer to do this. And so I have talked a little bit with our agencies about where I would see us going in this. Why are we focusing on this? Why are we focusing on this enhanced delivery to our at-risk and vulnerable population? Because I would like to employ our police officers to look at this from the capacity that we could build this into a program and see what we could do to collaborate and bring our resources together, see what we can do to build it and support the need for this position. I throw that out there because I think there is a need for it. There's some stuff that we can do within our existing resources right now, but if we were to look at a 5-year goal, and I was to say, if I was to look at obtaining a police resource in the next 5 years, I think this is where I see a need for it. That's kind of what I'm throwing out there.
Hey, do you want to follow up? And Maureen, come on up. Do you want to, maybe? Karen, do you have another?
I've got a question on a
Different topic, okay. Maureen?
So I just wanted to
Maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Maureen McKell. I'm the executive director for Helping Hands.
Great.
So this is something we've been talking about quite a bit in the last little while, particularly with Vancouver Coastal, and we keep getting locked into these bureaucratic loops and hoops, and I'm just wondering how we can truly get through this as a community and be collaborative and not get into this, well, we can't talk to you about this, and we're going to talk to them about this when it comes around here. And in particular, Helping Hands and my staff are generally on the ground with these folks. And so it's, in our best interest and in everybody's best interest that we work together and at the table. And so, yeah, I just wanted to see what your thoughts were.
I can't speak to what has been happening in the meetings here in our town, in Squamish, and I apologize to keep doing this to you guys. But being here 3 months, I hope that next year when we meet at this time for a similar meeting, I can speak really candidly about things. But I can tell you in previous communities that we've had problems in the health sector around being able to release information when it comes to mental health. What I can tell you is the RCMP has no policies that prevents Freedom of Information Act and sharing when we are talking about strategically trying to prevent crime and improve the health and wellness of an individual. We don't have we are aligned under national, BC, we have the Freedom of Information Act, nationally, I'm forgetting the name of the act, ATIP, thank you, moment, ATIP, where we are directed, not only implored to work together, but directed to work together to share information to make sure that we can work towards wellness. So if we are all sharing information for a consistent purpose with the goal of reducing crime and or keeping people safe, and we have agreed that we are sharing the information for that purpose. So I'm not just talking about going out and saying, hey, this person is committing these crimes, but I'm talking about a table that comes together for the purpose of trying to reduce that offense and or improve that situation. When we're talking about health and wellness of an individual, we don't have anything that prevents us from sharing. So I would want you guys at that table. I know your role in the community, and I really see you guys as valuable in that. So in this position, we would be having, and sometimes this I've found in my previous work in operations, rather than kind of in the management scheme of things, I've had to work a lot at pulling our BC policy that dictates all agencies, whether it be provincial agencies, health agencies, policing agencies, and educating. This is what we are, this is the law, the provincial law that we are obligated to work within. This tells us all, as service providers here at this table, we can share this information for this consistent purpose of health and wellness of this individual as well as. So if you need to go back to your specific agency and get your protocols realigned, please, let's do that. Let's bring those people to the table. And that's gonna be some of that early legwork we need to do to get the agencies communicating together. I'm pretty well versed in that and happy to direct my police officers in that manner and then bring people to board. Sometimes it's about bringing the heads of the agencies together and saying, listen, this is what we can do as interagencies. Here's how we need to cooperate. That,
And we've done it in an ad hoc basis on occasion, but
For
to have
sure.
this real strategic way of approaching it in a comprehensive way, then it's valuable.
Mayor Heinzman, Christine Matthews gave you the numbers. So the direct cost of the victim services program with one full-time individual is $90,000, and the provincial grant is $54,000, so just about 60% funded provincially.
Great, thank you very much.
thanks.
Karen?
Thanks. So the one thing that's not up here, but that's been a priority for our council, is the whole Haste BC thing. And I know for me, certainly, I would love to see enforcement in the short term around all of our school zones and our playground zones, just to try and create better habits in our
Can you repeat what you said to me?
Haste BC. That's our Safe Routes to School work.
Okay.
So we've done walk-arounds at each of our elementary schools.
Yeah.
And Martin and Jolene have been at a lot of them.
And I apologize, they are both away on training right now, and I would love to have them here at the table, this would be
Yeah.
amazing, so.
But
Thank you.
that piece around enforcement, and we talked last week about better signage in terms of when people are supposed to drive slowly,
Yeah.
but putting some of that resource into, if we're gonna put all this capital resource as a municipality into crosswalks and sidewalks, and we want children walking and biking to school,
Yes.
and people are driving too fast to make that happen.
Yeah.
So our biggest barrier right now is parent behavior,
Mhm.
because they see the speeding cars and so like, it's not safe for my kid.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, in a plan going forward, is to help support that idea of getting our kids active and on the roads by having more enforcement on a regular basis. I think
Yeah,
that's hard
school
to
zones.
do, but in school zones. And around Brennan Park is probably the worst one right now.
Okay.
So, and then lastly, I have two questions. At the district,
I do want to follow up on that piece too, so if we
Yeah.
change directions, just let me know.
Why don't we explore that one then?
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
go ahead.
So one is, we as a supervisory team, had number 4 on here as road safety, on and off. We went around in a circle in our planning session. Do we add it in? I think there's room to add it in just under enhanced public safety, get rid of the reducing violence crime and talk about it as enhanced public safety. We also said, but wait a minute, this is a policing expectation of our police officers. Whether or not we have it on as a strategic priority, we can still assign it as a task. Police officers, again, are expected to enforce the Provincial Motor Vehicle Act just in their duties, right? So we may not have something listed on here as what we want you to do, but we can create a monthly file that says you are assigned to Brandon Elementary and this is what we want you to do for this period of time. And that might just be an operational police response to a need that the community has. Or we can add it on there and throw it in there as this is something we want you to specifically carve off as spending time doing and just make it a sub-initiative. When we talk about that youth focus too, I think that is really different when we talk about school zones and safe places for pedestrians and cyclists versus when we talk about the provincial highway. So really shifting our focus to a specific objective around results in our community, in our schools, can be something that we come from this meeting and say, that's what we want to do. We want to carve the highway off of that and leave that to traffic services and your general duty policing responsibilities. And when we think about your unallocated time, you can't do it all. We'd like you to spend that time at your school zones. Those are, I just throw that out there as some of the ideas we can kind of come from this meeting and say, this is what we'd like to do.
So it just gets integrated in the operational perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah, certainly from my, it's a measurement. We know how many kids are walking or biking to school now, and in a few years, we'd love to measure that again. And if we don't have that kind of enforcement that slows people down and makes it safer, with all the changes we're gonna make on the streetscape, we won't win. We wanna win this one and get more kids biking and walking, so.
And next.
So my other two questions have to do with,
So no, this is anyone else want to, okay, go. Thank you very much.
Appreciate your input.
Thank you.
are on reconciliation.
Yeah.
And then on mental health. So in terms of reconciliation, I know at the district we're offering a reconciliation circle for all of our staff in May and September. And I'm wondering what the RCMP is doing for its officers to make sure that they understand the history and impact of residential schools so that when they respond to members of First Nations in the community, that they're aware of their own bias and adjusting their response accordingly.
I so welcome that comment, and I would like to say that the RCMP is made this a focus, because they absolutely have, but I feel like we've missed the mark in the delivery of our training. So we implemented a course and some training around history of Indigenous people in Canada, colonialization, what we've done as the RCMP across the board, and how that's impacted our First Nations population around Canada. I think the course was terrible. I took it myself, and I thought it didn't, for somebody who's coming into this with no information, or has not policed in the First Nations community, or does not have a relationship with an Indigenous person, or has not been educated in this way, they didn't get what they needed from it. But I think the conversation is happening nationally, provincially, and locally around improving service delivery to our Indigenous communities, how we work with our Indigenous communities. We have an outstanding Integrated First Nations Unit policing officer, so he works with Squamish Nation for North Van, West Van. He starts and finishes his day in Squamish and goes to visit people in our community here in Squamish, but also works with this team from North Van and West Van. He's outstanding, and he gets great information out there right away to our police officers when there's an issue or a change in the family. So for example, a death in the community that's impacted how we will respond to a particular residence or a family. He's doing a great job. He and I sat and met last week, and I just offered him my support in whatever I can do kind of as the officer in charge, in terms of if he's seeing anything that our police officers need, or if he needs support in the work he's doing from management, that he makes sure he's got an open line of communication to me. And it was a really good meeting. I guess that's a touch on, we have a lot of work to do, and I don't think we're there yet.
Linda, do you want to touch on what we're doing with our staff, and then maybe it's a conversation you and Jolene and Karen can have?
Absolutely. So sort of long-term, we're coming up with a Truth and Reconciliation Action Plan for the organization that encompasses anything long-term to going into bylaws and making sure that they're not relying on colonial vernacular and methods that we're not even aware of.
Mm-hmm.
What we're starting with, though, at the very basic level is there's a workshop called Building Bridges Through Understanding the Village. And it's a First Nations woman who's also a facilitator, and it's an experiential learning workshop. So the first day, it's actually role play, creative village, and it's Councillor Elliott participated as well. We are scheduling in May and September 2 workshops, 4 actually total, and hoping that all of our staff can participate as well as council. And that workshop for me was very powerful. I think Councillor Elliott would say the same. It's exceptionally well done, and so that's our first step with all of our staff, and then we're going to continue to build on that, with the almost emotional experiential learning, and then the more historical learning, and then getting more into policy and that sort of thing.
But
But I have made a note to have an introduction to that constable, and we could even talk about incorporating our CMP or some more into those workshops. If
Yeah,
there's-
that's,
We would love
you guys
to.
can have that conversation.
I know Jolene was just, she and, I say one of our members, I can't remember who the other person who participated was, but they were at Squaw Station building drums the other night, on Tuesday night, and just really interesting kind of feedback that they came back and were sharing, and they've got to give this drum away, and neither one of them want to, and it was the first drum they made, and now they're like, and it just generates some conversation. So I think that
They
there's
just have
lots.
to give it to each other.
Yeah, exactly. They give it to us and then we arrange to give it back to you. No, that's not how it works.
That's how it works.
So I'm happy. We're participating in pulling together with Vancouver PD and the RCP in June. We've talked about how we can participate in Aboriginal Days coming up. And I have an introduction and kind of a similar, a lot less formal meeting with the Squamish Nation on March 7th where I'm going to be introduced and then ask them for their input on where they want to see our police resources. So that's, sorry, I said March 7th, I meant to say April 7th. I'm going to take them. We missed that, Mark. Come on, Kara. So April 7th, and so we are doing what we can to sort of start this process, but I would hate to say we're doing a great job because I think there's a long route there.
No, I think everybody can do a better job. I mean, we're all
It's a
starting.
long game.
Yes, yeah. My last
So,
question.
so just quickly, anyone else on the Truth and Reconciliation, please, Susan?
Thanks. I participated in, I went down to a conference and it was mostly run by the RCMP in West Vancouver, and a lot of the First Nations RCMP participated in the dialogue, and it was all about their ability to report in the colonial system, and the numbers were horrific. And I think that everything we can do to learn, but those one-day seminars, they impact you and then it's gone. I'm wondering, there's so many amazing models out there of integrating RCMP and the First Nations in a meaningful way. In West Vancouver, North Vancouver has a unit. They look at gangs, they look at the social integration and more of the psychosocial aspects of that. But I suspect that our community, we are really lacking in that. We have people come up, but we don't really have that honest integration. So then it definitely sets us apart from our First Nations community in the ability to report, the ability to, they can't even attend, there's been issues with even attending the hospital because of being in the colonialized system. So I think the issues are pretty deep on that. And we go to, as a colonial person, you go to seminars and education units and you hear about the stories, but you go back to your community and the same perpetuated, like a part of our hospital was supposed to go to the First Nations, to have a First Nations unit, and ended up going to orthopedics. So we've missed out, and again, it's that integration part of how do we look forward to actually make a difference on the ground with reporting, with integration and making people feel like they're one community. And to me, it's a healthcare issue, it's a policing issue, there's so many issues involved, and I'm really glad that our municipalities, it's on the radar, which is the first thing, and taking courses are awesome, but it's, when our statistics are 1 in 3, their statistics are 3 out of 4 women. So when you're experiencing that level of trauma, how do you integrate with the RCMP to make sure that that we are addressing that community in an appropriate way? And when I went to this conference, and it was a few days of sitting with the RCMP and other communities and listening to their stories about how they grew up and how they're entering the police force and entering the RCMP or the fire department, or how they integrated into these systems in order to help the communities. And I wonder if that's something, you're already working with First Nations police officers here, and how that could benefit our community leaders in our First Nations. I just, again, it's all budgetary issues, and it goes in that big circle again, and where can we get funding for more officers, and but I think when the statistics are so high, but they're not reported, again, it all goes back to the same thing, and addressing it in little bits and starts, but not really fully committing to the resources that we need in order to make this community safe. integrated community?
So I'm still wrapping my head, and I'm not going to propose that I have a solution at this point. And I included a very basic current structure of what we've got here, which is actually, if you look at the integrated detachment, a larger structure, and I don't have on here our Squamish provincial police officers. So I've got one provincial constable that's attached to 3 of the watches. I also have 2 provincial police officers in my plainclothes unit. I've got our First Nations unit, and I guess I don't have a clear vision on how I'm going to move forward with this yet, although I've given it a lot of time and thought, and I will continue to. The deployment of municipal resources versus provincial resources in an integrated versus carved off fashion, working together. I don't know exactly what direction I want to go with this yet, but I do want to see our provincial component really addressing some of the provincial areas.
Or even
Reserve.
also First Nations Health Authority funding for, I'm wondering if there's outside the box thinking that we can think of for funding. Now that we have separation of resources, if we're working on things, if we can look at funding in those other areas as well.
Yeah, that touches on how comprehensive the approach has to be, right? So, so I think the important thing is that this is a priority for us. We have good intentions, but as been outlined, there's a long way to go before actually understanding and appreciating how and what needs to be done to fully reconcile and move forward in a positive fashion in the future. So we're in the infancy of that too, but
Great.
It's good to hear and see that it's becoming more comprehensive, and we want to hear ideas and openness and obviously collaboration with First Nations communities.
And I welcome going forward, it doesn't have to be at this moment, but going forward, if council has discussions and wants to provide direction to myself on how much or how little work we do with our municipal resources on reserve and or with the Squamish Nation, I welcome that input. That's a conversation. I think I'll just leave that at that point and not expect an answer, but I certainly welcome. I'm cognizant of funding models. I'm cognizant of paying for policing resources. I'm cognizant of tax dollars and our deployment of police resources. I also am cognizant of the greater overall health and impact of the area and the larger Squamish area and what we can do. And I throw that out there because if there, at some point, a direction does come to me, I will certainly take it into consideration in the deployment of my resources. Throw that out there.
Thank you. So on this, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so how do the Squamish Peacekeepers fit in at all? I mean, do they have a...
They have a role in our detachment. Our officers, I just read actually one of our brand new, I'm not supposed to call them recruits anymore, I'm supposed to call them new members. So our new members just finished his field coaching program, which is a 6-month program. And I was just reading his performance evaluation, and one of the pages in there was the work he was doing with the Squamish Peacekeepers and educating himself on their role. They're essentially like a liaison person for a police officer. So somebody who might come to the community, brand new to the community, doesn't know Squamish Nation, doesn't know the family history or individuals within the community. The peacekeepers are there as a go-to to say, hey, can you come to this house with me? Is there anything I need to know when I'm going into this domestic violence call about this family, about this history, about the lineage, about the impacts that residential school have had on Squamish Nation, any of that kind of stuff that they need to know? Are there any band council resolutions? Are there any specific initiatives that have been done to for healing or wellness within this community, family conflicts? Any of that sort of information that a peacekeeper can provide to the police officer to help the police officer make an informed decision around how they enforce the criminal code, create a safe environment for whoever's been involved in the incident in the house, how they do an apprehension if an apprehension is going to take place, involving local resources that the nation may have. All of that is provided in kind of a liaison capacity with the peacekeepers.
So are they contacted, like if you go onto the reserve, they're phoned right away, I guess?
I want to say, I can't say that they're called in every instance. I can say we have a very good working relationship with them. I don't know what the actual availability, and that's where I would have to rely on Jillian, I promise, because she's doing her annual, every 3 years we do our research for skills and mandatory, so we go and shoot our firearm and we go and get our first aid training and all that kind of stuff. She's on that this week, so she's the one who could actually speak to what the operational police response is and how they perform that. But in my experience, I've been educated kind of on what role they provide, that they are integral to supporting our police officers, and that we have a good relationship with them. Those are kind of that's my understanding of what we've got going on there. Day-to-day operations, I apologize. I will get there.
Yeah.
This isn't the last conversation we have with you. Karen?
Thanks. My last question is just about mental health of our first responders and what the RCMP does to, and probably Chief Storm, I'd ask you the same question if you're at the table, what we're doing to support our members, because they do see trauma in the community and they are there first. So what are we doing to help our RCMP members be resilient in the face of what they experience out in the community and look after themselves and report mental health issues instead of sweeping it under the rug?
Absolutely. So this one I'm actually excited to report on. It's close to our Indigenous issues where I know it's an issue for the organization and it's a priority for the organization. I think I heard in the commanding officer or the commissioner's speech last December was you either get on board with Indigenous issues that are going on today or you get out of the organization. So we've been having that kind of led in the Indigenous component. We're also having that same thing led in mental health. And we are making great progress in the mental health area. So what we've got going on is multifaceted. We have a Road to Mental Readiness course that all police officers and police supervisors were required to take. I'm excited to report that by the end of April, we'll be at 100% compliance for all of our officers to get there, and that wasn't the case when we first got here in January. So we've got that training in-house, and what that training does is it provides access to the police officers to what things we could be seeing as workplace issues, where we're going to see support in the organization, how to access support, just naming the problem and discussing it. It's a really valuable, the police officers who have taken it have said that it's been really valuable in just starting discussions and also knowing that the organization supports initiatives around mental health. There's a lot of discussion, correspondence, on the ground, support from what's called our health. So through our division admin, we have a health services and our human resources officer has been getting tons of information out to us on mental health and getting it out to the frontline members who are responding to traumatic incidents, dealing with PTSD, dealing with long-term exposure to repeated incidents of violence, that kind of stuff. So there's lots of great work getting out there to our frontline operations. As a manager myself, in my first year of service, my first policing year of service, had one of my coworkers die in the line of duty in a collision, and I was one of the first responders to that one. And so for me, it became something I became informed in at a very early in my service, 16 years ago, so 17 years in the organization, 16 years ago this incident happened, and I realized we had to get informed at that point on mental health issues within the organization or it was going to impact us all. And so I feel like going through my career, I've been able to lead and supervise in that environment where I can say to a police officer that comes into me, look, this is not what we want to be seeing and we need to get you talking to somebody. Something is happening here where you're jumping to violence too quickly or you're expressing, you've shut down, whatever it is, we were able to have and table those conversations. I feel quite attuned to those issues myself. I think that organizationally, there's lots out there. The impact that it's having is that people are talking about it more and getting help, and we are seeing vacancies because people needed to be pulled off the road and get the access to services. I'm trying to think if we're seeing any vacancies. We are not seeing any Squamish specific vacancies, but we are seeing some vacancies in Sea to Sky as a result of it. So yeah, really it is an issue and it is being addressed through our health services. We've got an excellent health services team. And then I talked about a lot more just amongst the members. There's maybe Fire could probably speak to this too, but I think that there's the culture of not talking about mental health issues, not talking about trauma is gone. And I'm impressed with this having just come from the Okanagan, it's a more senior group of police officers here. There's a younger group of police officers. There is some progressiveness here that I was totally taken aback within our. I put out a request for some police officers who were interested in getting sexual violence training and trauma-informed practice training. We got an overwhelming response, and people who just want to get educated in this area and are progressive in their thinking around sexual violence prevention and trauma-informed policing response, as well as when we talk about mental health, you see people talking about it. And I haven't been exposed to that in that same environment in the Okanagan. We have all the senior police officers there who are kind of bedded down for their career. the same discussions aren't happening. So pretty excited to be in this area. It's hard sometimes to take on new members and recruits, as we like to call them in the older days, but it's hard to take on recruits all the time, but they bring a really fresh new energy to the organization. So
That's great to hear. Appreciate it. Can we just go back to the priorities, because we
Yes.
have about 12 minutes
Please.
in this conversation. I want to just focus in on the direct feedback on this, and if we'd like to, augment or add or contribute to. And come on up, if you want to speak, you have to come to the table. Peter.
Thanks. I noticed that down near the bottom there, and you touched on it briefly, was talking about missing persons and unsolved homicides, and I know you sort of spoke to it with some conviction because you felt that some of those things could be tidied up. How big of a file do you really feel that is? And
I think our last count for Squamish unsolved homicides right now, we had 12. That's old, right? Some of these we're talking
Decades.
decades and decades old. Yeah, we're talking like 1950s, one of them, I want to say. But we've had a team come in and review some of those. So I should just piece that off. I asked about this because we are, as many of you are aware, we're going to the Missing and Murdered Women's inquiry in the fall. One of the things that we're required to do is review all of our unsolved homicides, or any of them women specific, indigenous specific. I can't tell you yet, I've got this up there as a topic, I can't tell you yet what we have in Squamish for if there is indigenous and or women specific, because our GIS team has been working on another project, so I've asked them to park it until they concluded that project last week and can focus on it in the next kind of period of focused time. So it's on their list of things to do is to look into those unsolved homicides, but one of the initial discussions I had with our plainclothes commander was, what do we have for homicides? He says, actually, we had a team come in from our provincial serious crimes unit who did a review of all of our files and gave us some really actionable tasks that could be done on these files. And he said, I believe out of those 12 files, there's a couple that we could focus on, so certainly not all of them, a couple that we could focus on and move forward in an investigative capacity beyond where they're at. It's hard to say if we could bring them to successful resolution of a charge or a conviction or closure for that family, but we could move them forward because that brings us more information to decide whether or not that gets us advanced enough. We simply haven't had the resources to dedicate to that at that time, because once a file kind of, so things that have brought those files back up again is our DNA technology, enhancement in some of our crime analysis and things like that have come from technology that have allowed us to advance these files a little bit, but not put the time and energy into.
I think that's the key piece for me anyway, and I think it is for you as well, the closure piece for the families. So I can't imagine anything worse than not knowing.
Right,
So
absolutely.
provide that, or at least take your best shot at it anyway.
And so I throw that up there because I think when we talk about enhanced service delivery, I think that there's a role that our general duty police officers can provide in this initiative. So take that social risk coordinator off. That's my growth period kind of piece. And just take the column on the left. When we look at youth, mental health, and missing persons, I think that is where I could see my, and so I'm talking about missing persons, I'm talking about current, today, a youth goes missing. How do we prevent that? If that's a chronic runaway situation, is there something behind that? If that is an adult with substance abuse issues that has gone missing for a weekend at a time, that's requiring a lot of these resources, but also stress on the family. What's behind that missing person? So looking at our general duty resources focusing on youth, mental health, and missing persons, and a focus on that area, I think we can do a lot to grow that initiative, or that priority, into specific initiatives that we want to see done on every file and partnerships that we could build. I think our Indigenous communities is another one that we can work into any of those subcategories, but also just grow what we're doing in education, in prevention, in collaborating with the communities. And then the unsolved homicides, I throw it in there because I would like to see our plainclothes supporting all of those initiatives, but if they were to support that at-risk and vulnerable population, I would like them to delve into, even if it's one of those files, looking at the task list, advancing it as far forward as they can, and just carving some period of time off. They've been really focusing on drug trafficking, and I would like to see them look at these. They've got a component in every single one of them. So they've got a component in the sexual violence, domestic violence, they've got a component in the property crime, and I think that they've got a component in this enhanced service delivery to our at-risk and vulnerable population. I see them working on all of those things together, but some really specific objectives in there.
Great answer, thank you.
Maureen, did you want
I just wanted to go back to that last point and suggest that there's probably room for collaboration there in terms of essential services and mental health of people who are working in that field. So just as a suggestion, that's also a way we can build rapport between the frontline workers and RCMP on the ground too. So it's something, why have every organization be doing these, separate things, but something that we can possibly do together at times. Obviously, sometimes you can't, but.
Yeah, and I think if I knew that this was one of our priorities, I would take part of I would maybe do it anyways, but I would take part of our O&M, our operating budget that we get. I would like to see us hold some sort of integrated training, right?
Exactly.
Where we are actually bringing people into the police station, which I don't think we do enough, and saying, here's what we're doing in this area, and then bringing those specific agencies in to collaborate on that training. Yeah, that'd be great.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Just in the youth one, the fentanyl, of course, is a big scary thing.
Yeah.
You've got youth up there, so I just wondered if there was any extra kind of teaching for the teenagers.
Yeah.
Same with you, Maureen, I don't know if you're talking about it with.
We've got our training.
Yeah. And then the other one is bait bikes. I mean, I know we're not on that topic. Bait bikes.
Well, you can bring it up.
So I'll just speak to the youth one, and we will still continue the DARE program, which is a decision-making model. It's evolved, so it was an old program
Yeah.
that was like abstinence and don't make these choices. And it's evolved now into a decision-making model on how you make decisions just generally in life. I think that I've been told, and I haven't seen the program taught, but I've been told that it's significantly improved in the school district. The old DARE program, they were not as receptive to having us in there, and that older model, the teaching curriculum wasn't up to speed with where we wanted things to be in today's generation, and that this new curriculum is actually really valuable. So I would suggest that we will continue that regardless of, youth is going to stay on there because they have to be our priority in every issue, whatever it is, I think. But I think that when we speak about fentanyl and drugs, that decision-making model needs to be included in there, and I would want to consider that being taught in our school districts by all means. And fentanyl education has to continue to happen.
I didn't know if it was like more highlighted
Yeah,
now, of course, because of all the people everywhere dying.
I think so. I would say. Dr. Tyndall just spoke on it. He was excellent. He was really clear. He's an expert in this field. He really clearly said if we got rid of fentanyl, the next drug would come in. The previous one was oxy. And so we can't talk about it as necessarily a fentanyl issue, but that it is a substance abuse issue, and what do we do around that substance abuse issue. It was a really excellent presentation. I'd love to get him in to speak to our service providers. Just heard him at BC Chiefs. Anyways, that's on the side. The bike thefts and bike bank program, I've already funded our GIS program to purchase bike banks and go ahead with that. We've brought in Garage, what is it, Garage 529? 529 Garage. And it's a bike theft program. We're going ahead with that this year anyways because I think it's a prevention model that needs to happen, but it's one that's being held in Portland, in Seattle, in other areas where bike theft is an issue. This corridor, more specifically than anywhere else in the province, bike theft is an issue. I'm not saying that our rates of bike theft is higher. What I'm saying is high-end bikes coming to this area for a tourist purpose, affecting people who are coming to this community and Whistler across the board to recreate. I think we've got to work on that bike theft one. We want them to be able to come down to the pub after, have a meal with their family, leave their bikes securely locked on their vehicle and feel safe to do so. And we need to be able to be a part of that solution. So that, I think, that will be done regardless of whether or not it's on our plan. Just because I've said go ahead with this program, they had to get it started in the early parts of this year to get all the components in place. But something else we've got is a GPS tracker. The software for this program, 529, which is really, it's an app. I won't get into all the specifics because I won't do it justice, but it's an app that the communities are using and that individuals within the biking community are using to recover bikes. I think it's a really good investment. It does require a bit of a financial commitment, but nothing that we can't do within our existing budget right now.
Anyone else from the audience who wants to ask a question or make a comment? Just want to make sure. Yeah, and with regard to this list, I certainly think it's a great start. I think I'm hearing around the table a real support for the social risk coordinator approach. I'd like to understand if that's an actual constable, RCMP constable, or if it's a more civil role, but we don't have to make that determination now. But from my point of view, it's really refreshing to see, as you sort of alluded to earlier, less a fire extinguisher approach to policing and more of a community-based policing model where we're really learning and understanding and collaborating with the community to problem solve and make our community safer. So this has been a refreshing way of approaching the policing conundrum. Great.
Well, just, I guess on that position that Christine was talking about, where it's 55% funded, we'll be talking about that next budget, right?
Yeah, we can, and I think the specialized one is 100% funded by the province, but we can get that clarity.
Yeah.
I would like to report back to you more on
Okay.
on that, and
Yeah.
just get Jenna, have you met Jenna yet? No? Jenna, our victim services worker? Okay, at the training there. So I would like to get Jenna to do some research for us on what our needs are and where we need to, she's excellent. Love to have her here at some point.
That'd be great.
Just be able to build on that. So let me take that back, get some more information, and we can set a follow-up discussion for that.
Awesome.
Okay.
So anyone else at this point? Any issues or problems with the sort of strategic priorities that's outlined? Didn't hear any of that.
I think just the one thing I would love to hear from you guys is, do we want to see road safety added as a fourth point? Are we comfortable with it within our operational plan? I guess that's the one that I was really on the fence about coming into this.
Yeah, and I think, as Karen said, focusing in on our safe routes to school and youth in particular. I think the highway road safety thing is a provincial function, and the province will, it's important obviously because our citizens travel the highway too.
Yeah.
But I think generally I'm hearing safe routes to school, areas where our vulnerable communities, our seniors and our children are sort of most prevalent, I think would be a great focus area. If we, maybe it is added to this list and not just operational, I mean, it will be an operational function for sure, but council, any thoughts on, generally speaking?
Okay.
I'd like to see it on the list,
Yeah, okay.
so that
It's not left off as a priority.
Yeah,
we're gonna spend a lot of money on this.
clearly
We
dovetails
need
into
something
the
help, yeah.
So it's an action
I
plan.
feel like we can put it on there as a fourth point, and like I said, we had it on and off and on and off, so
Yeah,
let's add it.
yeah, and really a public safety, from a public safety perspective.
Yeah. We'll find a place for it. It doesn't have to look exactly like this, so.
Absolutely.
On and off and on and off?
We'll find a specific way to focus on it. That's great.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for coming. Why don't we take a 5-minute break and we'll be back. Welcome back everyone. We're in the committee of the whole meeting of Tuesday, March 21st. And we're on item 3.2 and probably 3.3 as sort of one more big comprehensive discussion about these two bylaws that currently sit at first reading and are going to go out to a comprehensive community dialogue about them. So over to you.
Mayor Huntsman, I'll
Over to Lynn.
introduce the team, if I may, only because we did work quite diligently between Jonas in planning and his team, and then Christina in communications and myself around how to frame this and what we really are seeking to do in terms of meeting council's objectives and going back to the community. So essentially, thanks to Christina primarily in terms of our IAP2 principles brought us back to that, and what the team will present in further detail is our recommendation to council is really what we thought about was what did we miss, where was the gap, and rather than go back to the community and specifically get into the detail of the bylaws necessarily, it's what was the objective behind them, and engaging on that level and dovetailing it in with the bylaw language and then are there different alternatives and talking about the vision of downtown. So without further detail, I won't take your thunder, I just wanted to present that that's where this recommendation is coming from.
So, very quick question, just to be mindful of Councillor Carr's conflict. It's mostly setback issues, the main one. I'm just trying to make sure that Councillor Pryor can participate when he can participate, but not in when he can't, so just,
So based on the memo that you have in front of you, the first conversation is around our engagement with the stakeholders in the community around the downtown vision and what's driving this bylaw, without getting into the specifics of the bylaw itself, whether it's setbacks or building height. And then the second phase is about how do we manage in-stream developments. Robin's not here, my sense is the public engagement aspect, Councillor Pryor, wouldn't be in conflict.
yeah.
If council does want to dig into the bylaw itself in this conversation, that would be.
And I think the intention here is to not necessarily drill down into the bylaw massively, articulate intention and sort of goals, but fundamentally, we're trying to go to the community to make sure we're being inclusive and collaborative in terms of making sure that everyone's intentions are on the table and we understand where we're going, so. And I really encourage anyone to come and join the table.
And I will keep that in mind, Mayor Meisterman, if we start wading into something where Councillor Pryor may.
Yeah, just be mindful of that, it'd be great. All right.
Yeah, when you start to
Thank you.
change the setbacks on my property.
So we've broken up the presentation into two essentially. The first part will be dealing with the public engagement strategy, and the objective today is to present it at a very high level and not get into the details, which we are working on, but we need council direction to continue that work. And then the second part will be on in-stream applications. So I'm giving it over to Carrie Hamilton, our planner, to cover the public engagement strategy.
Great.
So as Jonas mentioned, the objective of today's meeting is just to discuss two topics. So the downtown public engagement strategy, to present to council what the proposed downtown public engagement strategy is, and to encourage feedback and discussion that leads to staff direction as to how to proceed. And as well as the second point is the interim direction for in-stream applications. And this is to present to council options for processing the application in the interim for discussion and for direction. So the first topic is the downtown public engagement strategy. And we have here a who, what, and how. So the who is who we want to engage, and it's the downtown owners and agents, tenants, residents, BIA, and other relevant groups. The what, we want to define the vision for the downtown neighborhood plan and active transportation plan. And then the how is the explore options on how to achieve the vision. And how we may want to propose to do that is through workshops and surveys. So kind of lead open to discussion here.
Okay, I've got Councillor Pryor and Councillor. Councillor Pryor?
Yeah. So what I find, I mean, I'm happy that you're getting the word out to invite people to the discussion. The biggest thing when you're doing, you know, like roads and things like that is, to me, it's maps and pictures. And so, like in the discussion, there's certain parcels that are affected. It'd be nice if there was a picture, like if it's one person with one lot, they go like, some people thought that there were lots were involved and then they aren't. So it'd be nice to have a clear picture showing each one, each area, these lots are this, and then show a picture of however everything works on that. And I think that's the clearest way of getting, especially when you're dealing with street trees and, you know, does the building come over, or does the building go straight up, kind of thing. So I think for getting the word out, pictures are the best for that.
And that's certainly the plan, is to really communicate what was initially proposed. So I think the plan is to go back to the downtown neighborhood plan and our active transportation plan and communicate the vision of the two. So I think those are the given. And then we will dig down into, you know, how does this potentially affect the property owners, and be very clear around what the bylaw was proposing, because obviously there was, the main confusion was with regards to what the bylaw was actually trying to do. So we'll use pictures, maps.
Yeah, visuals are really critical, and if you go back and watch the public hearing, there's lots of interesting comments about how you're going to treat existing buildings that are already built in this footprint. How would the interface be differently to still achieve the goals of streetscape and active transportation? So even having some visuals to communicate how a street might look integrating the old with the new, for example, the putback, the setback impact on various properties. So visual, I think, is really key. As soon as the presentation started to happen at the public hearing, where there was some visuals, I'm like, that's the visual that was missing at the report. That's the thing, because you could see people in the audience going. So really, 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 really critical.
Thanks, I appreciate this coming forward, but I still don't understand why, this is a massive piece of our infrastructure, and it should be done through the OCP. Like the public actually said as well, we are in the middle of an OCP process. Why are we not engaging about how we want the look and feel of our town to happen through an official city plan process, instead of separating out areas, which has been the problem altogether? Is we're separating out, we act in isolation of the rest of the town, and we're not big enough to do that. We need a comprehensive process that imagines where density is needed. If we start saying no density here and let's have an engagement process about restricting one area and restricting another, we have to imagine where we're going to put employment land, housing. If we don't understand that in relationship to everything else going on, it's a lost cause. You can't just engage one small group of business owners and say, what do you want to see in your entire downtown? It needs to be an exact, comprehensive, the chamber needs to be involved, like the community needs involved. This is the community's downtown. And if you're, I understand a lot of the things. I look at them and think this is some really good policy, but in the absence of everything else that's going on, we're looking at mud changes in the business park. You know, is downtown, is going to be driven by density. Are we going to suck one street out of that and make it different than understanding how it fits into the rest of the community? It doesn't seem fair to the community to separate it from an OCP that's going on immediately right now.
So can you help us understand the fine grainedness of this type of policy, how it fits in the OCP, what's happening in the OCP, how the downtown neighborhood plan. I mean, some of the problem is the lag time between getting the OCP done and some of the other strategies that we accomplished, including the active transportation plan and the downtown neighborhood draft. And so I think that's where Councillor Chappelle's going, is that we want this to be comprehensive from a community point of view, but there's different grains of detail that would happen through a bylaw process versus an OCP process. So I mean, if you could help us.
Yeah, so we are taking direction from some of these plans that are going to be rolled into the OCP, like the downtown neighborhood plan, which has had quite a bit of consultation over the years it's been drafted. Well, it went between 2008 and 2014.
Without any adoption or review?
No, that's right. So it still needs to be adopted. We still will be doing some consultation downtown on the downtown neighborhood plan, because the next stage of public engagement will be taken into different neighborhoods. So that's one thing. The downtown neighborhood plan does have community buy-in in that it has gone through an extensive community process. And ideally we would put it as part of the OCP. We would wait to do the changes downtown. They're fairly significant. We'd wait till the OCP is adopted. The issue is we have so much development pressure downtown, and what we're trying to do, I think, is to get in front of it with these amendments.
And I think the focus is, we're trying to focus on the intention, and how we get there, I think, is what we're trying to debate and get our brains around in terms of create the vision and then the mechanisms to get there. So Paula, yeah.
Thanks. I completely appreciate that there's a lot of development pressure in the downtown, but that's happening because we changed bylaws and made things good for a lot of people. There's still issues like parking, and how are we going to address parking issues and things that we need to deal with that density. But, it doesn't mean that what is there is not appropriate, or that we need to do this massive revisioning of the downtown. It means that we need to, because I look at a lot of these developments and we need housing immediately. We don't need housing down the road, or we don't need housing after visioning exercises. We need employment land immediately. And it seems backwards to slow down something where we're in desperate need. Maybe we need to revision things like integrated mixed-use density and density bonusing for affordable housing, and that there's other things, and maybe we don't need active transportation down every street and make sure that every street, but maybe we need to set those corridors, and those are the things we need to look at. But slowing down just because we've got applications, we've been begging out for applications for years and saying like, why have we had this restricted, why haven't people been interested? We've had this black mark on us for development, and now we've got the development we want instead of actually, looking at how we can be innovative with the development that we have. And, we've basically passed every project except for one that's come up to us. We need to maybe not slow down the development, but slow down what our requirements are for those developments. If it's left 6 floors, maybe that 6 floors of mixed-use density, where we actually use the 6 floors as bonusing. There's a lot of innovative ways to get there. Yeah, there's a lot of innovative ways to get there, but taking everything down and leaving a first reading in restricting is basically sending out a message to developers that we're going to restrict you, we don't know what we want, instead of looking at the plans that we have and saying, can you fit into the plans we have to adjust the parking.
And we can certainly take the approach that we'll repeal first readings and all these and start from scratch. First reading is really an introduction. If it's sending the wrong message, we can contemplate pulling that back. I know Jonas has said before, one of the main reasons why we're trying to figure out is right now, every application that comes to council needs variance.
Yes.
And everything is coming with a variance. So we're trying to take away that bureaucratic process and create a system whereby we have some sort of bonusing system that allows you to go to 6 stories if you get another story of office, if you get a LEED certification or some sort of green building certification, and that's, I think, where we're trying to get to through the community dialogue. So all those things that you use. So, and I don't want us to get too distracted by how we're doing it, because I think once, I think Jonas was trying to articulate, once we sort of get the intention out there, how we do about it, then we can discuss, okay, what's the best way to get to the intention?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think we're generally, what you said, I can't disagree with any of the intention of what you're trying to say there. It's just, now we're trying to figure out how to do it with the community. It could be repealing first readings.
Yeah,
that's totally an option. There could be a benefit to leaving first readings in terms of just having a point, of launching off point for the discussion. That's totally up for council to have that deliberation. So, yeah.
And the point is not to slow down these applications or developments, is to actually figure out what the expectations are, so that it's clear for these development proposals what they need to do right now. They come in through the door and it's kind of like a changing goalpost, because we are finding all these holes and we're trying to apply them to the variances or rezonings that are coming forward. It'd be nice to just, here's the bylaw, here's what you need to do.
Yeah. And parking is a piece that hasn't been considered, and there are pieces missing within these things that aren't getting us to the intention.
Yeah,
I'm going to, actually, I'll
Yeah, go
hold
ahead.
on to that. I have Karen Peatland.
When is the draft OCP going to, my understanding is that it is coming out in early April, and so that this process and the review of the draft OCP will be happening sort of at the same time. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so phase 3 is coming out in early April, and so we'll be going back out to the community with core content and going to each neighborhood. It will be around the same time as we're doing this, yes.
Can you just go back to your 3 stages?
Yep.
I like that tenants are included in the who, because I think the tenants will have a different view than the owners of the building. And I think the intent of this bylaw was really good. I think our execution, as we know, wasn't fantastic. But I think the vision is right. And I think that with the upgrades happening at Garibaldi Mall, and it being easy to park up there and wide sidewalks and easy to push a pram around, and with oceanfront developing, if we're not careful, downtown becomes a place to drive through, because its streetscapes are boring and uninteresting, and people can't walk easily, they can't get around easily. And I think, that's the piece that we sort of failed to communicate to the building owners most of whom have made a ton of money already on their property, is that we're actually trying to incorporate them into an interesting public realm. And so that it becomes an interesting place that people want to be. And I think this approach, hopefully, will be able to help them understand that it wasn't about taking land or making things more difficult. It was about actually the long-term view and making sure that this is a vibrant place that people want to come to. And certainly, parking's got to be part of that as well. There were some great points brought up about have we thought about this, have we thought about that. But I think overall, this is the right direction to go. We already said as a council we wanted the downtown neighborhood plan incorporated into the OCP, so I'm expecting all of these to show up there. So I feel like, you know, I almost wish now we just put a moratorium instead of until we had a little bit more time to consult with people. So I'm interested in what you're going to say about how we deal with interim applications.
Let's hold on to that, we'll get there. And I do want to say that I don't think we should be necessarily specifically talking about the value of land now versus then versus the future. I think we're trying to keep to that overall vision of the community, making it vibrant, not a drive-through community. And although it's relevant, we don't want to diminish people's investments. It's certainly our driving factor in that.
No, we're trying to enhance.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do here. I think that's where the message is.
I don't begrudge anyone making money off their
No,
land.
absolutely not. I want to make money off mine.
All right, Pete, had-
Yeah, thanks. I think this is the best use of our community assets and it's mining, for those comments and touching upon the shareholders. And to Sue's point, I mean, it's not just the business or the residents. It's the businesses, the residents, the chamber, it's everybody. And I think parking will come forward out of that whole consultation. I did like something you said there, active transportation corridors. Like it's not just going to be every street. We should pick
very
specific
clearly
areas,
to streets.
specific areas just for that. And I think that's a key piece. But I think one of the key messages here was it's the look and feel of the town. It's the public realm. It's everything, and people want to be aware of. That's what we're trying to shape here. It's not we're trying to restrict you or take this away from you or make your property less viable. But we want you to understand that we're trying to integrate this all into the look of the town. And I think that message might have been lost, or I think it was pretty assuredly lost last time around.
Ted.
Thanks. Well, to Sue's point, I think this is getting some of the things that you're asking for. Like bike lanes. It's going after second floor business. And these are some of the things that we've talked about as a council for a long time. And we can't put that off till the OCP with the development pressures that are on right now. And so I support it all. I think it was great. And as far as getting people to the table, I thought it was perfect. I mean, look at how
It worked.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to do something a little extreme and it wakes everybody up. So we certainly brought everyone to the table, so it's really good. Someone mentioned public realm. I think Karen mentioned public realm, and I just want staff to write Winnipeg Street down in big letters on their notes there, because we're talking about all sorts of streetscapes and things here, but I think we're missing a few things like central public realm to the town, so Winnipeg Street, and then parking. I'm happy to hear parking being brought up 3 times, and it wasn't me.
We just bring it up so you don't bring it up.
Yeah. And so no, I think it's going along well. I'm happy that it's here, and good timing, because there's just so much coming in and everyone's taking out their DPs, and like the one guy said, now my DP's in, you can't change in front of my building, right? And it's like, sorry, you can't. It's good. Thank you.
Thanks. To your point, Ted, I love that when people come out and get mad, but I prefer they not get mad about public engagement. I prefer they come out with suggestions and goodness, as opposed to yelling that we didn't tell anybody. That was really harsh. So, and that
I
was
think we all acknowledge
yeah.
that we dropped the ball and we're going to do it better.
Exactly, but to put forward to that point, putting forward a bylaw that doesn't address any of the questions that the public has had concern with, or address parking, or address public realm, it doesn't do that. All it does is restrict and put some setbacks in, which I wasn't sure if I understood the bigger. Yeah, but I don't want a bike lane on Cleveland Avenue. If I was
It's
going
not
to
on
restrict
Cleveland
it,
Avenue, the
it's
setbacks
on the
are
back, it's on the,
It's on Second Avenue.
yes.
Oh, Third Avenue, sorry.
On Third Avenue
and
and on Loggers Lane, exactly. So the setbacks, I was unclear as to whether the setbacks on Cleveland Avenue were to address that. I know it's to address
There are no
wider
setback
sidewalks.
changes on Cleveland.
Right. So, but there was some really great points brought up by the public in terms of, garbage pickup and trucks and things that we hadn't thought about. But, I just think that putting a bylaw forward with a hammer like that, and I had said that before, is just really inciting not beneficial public engagement. And we do have IAP2 strategies. I really like that in this document it shows IAP2 strategies. And I think that over the last year we've really lost a lot of, we've mostly been acting at the level of inform and not consult. And I really would rather pull everything back, remove first reading, and do as staff suggests and, find out, forget about the bylaw and actually engage staff, go out and maybe it's a downtown neighborhood plan, maybe that's changed. That document is 2008 to 2014 and carries on and Ted will remind you about the 2001 and, there's lots of downtown neighborhood plans. But meanwhile, we've rezoned Mammoth Blind Channel. We've had all these developments that have come forward with amazing, innovative ways to be. We've had, smart city concepts come forward. There's so much future thinking that we need to do in our community to build appropriate infrastructure, lessen car traffic, and make it centralized parking is an absolute necessity. We can't require every building to have enough parking, otherwise we lose the entire streetscape. So if we move forward with centralized parking, and which I read that we are going to be looking at, which I really love that idea, then maybe we can look at having some innovative buildings and better sidewalks and streetscapes. Maybe we pedestrianize. But, to ask for the public's input on what they would like to see, and if we're firm in the fact that we want to keep our employment lands in the second floor office space, or not necessarily second floor, but somewhere. I really loved, Jonas mentioned having it somewhere in the buildings, which is a great idea, just saying a percentage of the building. And all those other ideas can be very simply bylawed, or however we put it into a visioning document and then sent to the OCP for community engagement, without coming in and saying, oh, we're just restricting, because that sends a message to UDI, to all the groups that are investing now in our community, and saying, no, we're slowing things down, we're stopping, we're moratorium. That's language that is really restricted to investment.
Let's focus in on the intention and the public engagement. If we determine that the first readings aren't getting us to the intention, then we can talk about repealing the first readings.
Okay.
So it's totally open to council.
I'm talking about repealing.
I believe I heard that. I've got a list here, myself and then Ted and then Jason. So the downtown is such a fundamental part of our community. And we have grappled with how do we make sure we're creating this vibrant built environment, this vibrant streetscape. It's not a pass-through for anywhere. It is a destination. And it has a unique character, vernacular that's different from the areas of town. You're going to see a lot of the density down here. So we need to figure out a way to move people around safely, pedestrian. I mean, I'm just sort of talking about my intention. I think the world's come a long way in terms of how we view what a street should look like. And there's a lot more that we can change. So in terms of my intention, if we can figure out a way that we get what we want in terms of a safe street for transportation, and it might be a new concept like a living street or that type of thing on the shorter streets, and it may not mean that we actually have to get set back a certain way to achieve our goals. So I mean, that's the kind of dialogue I'm looking for from the community in terms of figuring out how do we reach our intention while not having really negative unintended consequences that can sometimes come out of these sort of more blunt legislative tools that we have. That's some of our challenges. We've got this legislative language and rules that we have to play by in terms of delivering the intention of what the community wants in the future. And sometimes those tools are crude and they're not nuanced like an idea is nuanced. And so trying to figure out how we use the tools that we have to get the intention that we want is a bit of a puzzle to figure out. And we are dealing, I think, with DPs that don't realize the vision. Our development permit guidelines are not delivering on creating that downtown that is not a pass-through downtown. So I think that's where the gap is. I think you're starting to see that vision articulated in the OCP. Some elements of it are in the downtown neighborhood plan. And there's a bit of a gap between how do we bring our bylaws and policies up to meet the intentions that are starting to be articulated in these other documents. So we're sort of in that a bit of a gap zone right now, and I think that was certainly staff and council's intention, is we want to make sure we're figuring out how to resolve the gap between delivering on the vision through. So we used a bit of a blunt instrument and it wasn't done well. I don't think we have to revisit that. So certainly from my intention, that's what I'm looking for. With regard to the height piece, I don't think anyone in their mind thinks we should all be 2 stories. And anyone in their minds, we should all be 8 stories or 6 stories. From my point of view, I want to create the mechanisms that get us to a really interesting built environment. And that could be, and this is just a hypothetical, but maybe there's almost like, and I'm simplifying it, but a checklist system. If you're going to go to 6 stories, you have to have X amount of commercial in it. You know, 2nd story, 4th story, whatever. If you're going to 6 stories, it has to be a certain quality on the stretch code when we get to the stretch code or the step code or whatever it's being called now. You know, so maybe there's a bit of a criteria. If you're just going to do a basic box with nothing, then you're doing 2 stories. So like, I'd like to figure out a system whereby we get to our intention and we have those parameters within the bylaws that sort of allow it. If you want a 4-story, then here's the checklist you got to do to get the 4-story. And then people aren't coming in with every single variance under the sun, because you're going to need to create those different rules for a 6-story building and a 4-story building. There's likely going to be some sort of parking strategy with a 6-story building, because there's no way they're going to get it on their footprint. So, especially if they're a smaller lot. So, I mean, this is how so I don't want to get into prescriptiveness about how we get there, but that's sort of the goal or the intention with regard to that. I'll tell Susan. Ted, Jason.
Well, that was well said, yeah, because I think that's where we're at too. We're kind of, we know what's coming, but we're back with the incentives that we created 15 years ago to incentivize development. So, but you know, so the 2nd floor and business, other than the ground floor stuff, is stuff that you've been pushing for years, Sue. And so I was happy to see that, because you know, we're looking into the future. But someone said blind channel, and I thought also in the pictures, when you bring the pictures in, you know, the waterfront walkway is a bike route. That's going to be one of our main bike routes. And if you picture that bike route going around and under the highway, you know, and hooking into the corridor trail. So this is where the 1,000 people a day are going to ride in, because they're not bringing their cars, right? But anyway, they'll all come down there, and it'll pop out at Main Street, being where the main bike route crossing the intersection will be Pemberton and Main, I understand. So I think when you do the maps, make that really clear. And then to Patty's point on the, you know, the kind of creative stuff, you know, to me it's always in the intersections on the corners is where people are going to want to sit in the coffee shops. And I think that, you know, we haven't got there yet, and one of the reasons I was supporting this freeze or whatever it was I think Winnipeg Street, where the clock is the most important area. And if if we could stop anybody building property line to property line on that particular intersection, I was really happy. And the same with Main Street, actually, because Main Street's got the park coming through, and it'll be a very, very important corner. So I'm happy. I mean, hopefully this will maybe bring some of that out, where the real happy corners are going to be.
The happy corner policy, I think that brings up, and this is, some of the problem with the legislation is we kind of prescriptive, you know, but maybe we do need to take a more of a, if you're on a corner and you're gonna have a different setback, how do we compensate for that? Maybe you go higher, maybe you have more variance on parking, maybe you, I don't know, I'm just, but sort of getting to the intention is the goal. Jason?
Well, I think one of the things that hasn't been mentioned yet, though, is that, you know, I actually think that staff, you know, did a good job because they were trying to have you know, a very clear expectation sent out so that people, when they came for rezoning or variances, would understand it would be the same rule for everybody. So I don't have a problem with it at all. And I mean, obviously it's clear that some people had different understandings of what was in or not there, but at the end of the day, I mean, be informed, being an informed property owner, ask questions, that kind of thing. And we as a council, I think, have to remind people when they come to us and they tell us that, oh, well, you know, I'm expecting to redevelop and I'm expecting to do all of this. Well, rezoning and variances are discretionary. So you don't bank your future on having a rezoning or a variance at a later time. It's what your current zoning states, and you know, that's not our problem, frankly. And so I think that, you know, it may be the case, it could impact some other people in terms of what they had future visions for rezonings, but that's the nature of land development. I mean, there's no certainty around a rezoning or a variance, and I think that you know, one of the things that I would really like to see, and one of the things that we have to consider as a council, is not just the impact on property developers or landowners or businesses, but also the public realm and the wider picture. So I think we're getting there. And one other thing I wanted to add, as far as for consideration in the whole discussion, is sort of viewscapes and view corridors, right? Because that's going to have a very significant impact, you know, site-specific, as to, you know, are you going to require, you know, a stepped-back form of development? And, you know, the draft downtown neighborhood plan has lots of examples in there. I mean, it's not that we're making this up on the fly. It's been there for a while. So I think that, you know, I understand that, you know, some people were taken a little bit by surprise, but, you know, overall, I think the thrust and the gist of it is very called for at this point.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks.
And then Jonas.
Yeah, I disagree with that, because what you're doing is setting it in place for council to have the discretion of what your downtown is going to look like. You're not giving it to the community. You're saying, you're going to have to come to us, and 6 of us are going to decide what the downtown are going to look like.
7.
7 of us, yes, sorry. 7 of us are, and not only that, but in a year and a half, there'll be a council that may not have the same green view corridor process that we have, and then they'll be deciding what the downtown looks like. Because it'll be that slow, and in the meantime, we won't have any development because the same.
I don't think that's the intention at all.
Absolutely, that's not what, absolutely. I know that wasn't the intention, but that is what happened. So I'm going to make a suggestion, and this is what Pemberton did, is they received a grant from the Real Estate Foundation in order to engage city planners that have done this downtown visioning, and just to have an expert come in so that it's not all on staff time, and maybe apply for a grant and see if we can bring in somebody to help staff that's done downtown visioning. And it's possible, just to help the facilitation process, and you know, if we have to leave all this up to staff and staff time, there's going to be a lot of things that aren't going to get done. And there's things like that. I think the parking strategy integration with this is huge. Pemberton did the downtown visioning and had exactly this, not the downtown neighborhood plan, but like, how does our main street look, and what are the bylaws, and what is the process. And you know, if that's not possible, just to help fund some of it, Yeah,
We can look into helping
Exactly.
funding. I think we want to get to
That'd be great.
what this will look like, and then we can just determine how onerous this is on staff and figure out how to
Exactly.
make it happen. Jonas,
and other communities that have done it too.
Well, I think we have the vision for downtown, which is in the downtown neighborhood plan and our active transportation plan, which also went through an extensive public engagement process.
We also need to.
So we have the vision, it's the implementation now of that vision. And I think and I agree, some support would make sense here, but I think maybe it'd be better spent on an architect or something like that to figure out those details about garbage, parking, second floor parking on those smaller lots and the corner lots. And the other point I wanted to make was the distinction. So far we've been really planning to engage on the bylaw 2513, which is the setbacks and the employment space. Because we have the Cleveland Avenue and we have 2 rezoning applications on Cleveland, through which we're expecting we're going to work out the appropriate setbacks for upper stories, the shading, the view impacts. So those things, the developers that are bringing forward these applications, they can provide that. And then we would incorporate that in the OCP. So I think there's the pressing issue of setbacks, employment space, and then there's the overall discussion about height and density and bonus density. Our efforts become much larger if we are going to try and get this done now, both of those pieces.
You don't see a connection between the heights and the viewscape, and the additional employment plans?
I think there's definitely a connection. It's just a matter of capacity, right? So we have, because I think we're going to learn quite a bit from the 2 rezoning applications that are on Cleveland Avenue, that it would make sense to leave that piece for the end goal of the OCP.
Yeah, I'm just not sure how you teach this. I've got a couple on the list here. Ted, Karen, Peter, Susan.
Well, just to the architect, I mean, we do have ADP. You might want to give them the information and ask them to do a little report on it.
We did talk about having a conversation with ADP, so
Yes.
Because I'm sure a lot of them would love to give us advice. And as far as an urban planner, to Sue's point.
Architect is an awesome name, whoever.
No, but
professional and stuff.
Do you remember we were reading that newspaper article?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a
Yeah.
guy's name there, and this guy is an urban planner that goes around small towns and does a quick once-over and writes a report.
Who was it?
He's actually an architect,
Oh, an
and his
architect.
name's Bing Tom.
Yeah,
He's
he's
a very famous
real
guy.
famous guy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we had Larry Beasley come in here a few years ago, and he consulted for the district, and at that time, he was world renowned. And he did-
Not any longer, but
Well, he's not in the,
There's a litany of people we could bring in.
But we did get a fair bit of information out of him then, and whether we took it, that was another thing. But I mean, if the planning department thinks that that would help, I think it would be worth our while bucking up for, just because it's going so fast, and we only have like 4 streets.
Yeah.
We've got 4 downtown streets, so 8 intersections. They're going fast.
I'm glad you brought up architect, because I think that's the one thing that we don't think about is sort of we can say, okay, just move the setback back, but we don't think about all the things that might influence in terms of the building design and the building function and how it interfaces with the building environment. So I think an architect might be actually really interesting.
Are there more
And
slides?
please, Bianca, if you want to join in.
I will, yeah.
Are there more slides?
Not on the public engagement strategy. We have some slides that go really in detail, but we'd rather not go there. Because
I'm wondering if we're talking about height and setbacks and you actually had information about that, or whether you just want us to.
I don't think we want to get into, my fault as chair, we should be focusing in, I think we're trying to sort of just make sure all the topics are on the table, make sure that the public knows that we're trying to have this dialogue with them, so let's focus on the engagement, and then we can wrap that up and we can go through the rest of the, so, do you have any more?
Well, one, I think the ADP should be on the who. because we have them.
Yes, we'll
Or
certainly
the
bring
house.
the bylaw to ADP.
With how, and, well, I have lots of thoughts on setbacks and, but if we're just talking about engagement, because people are talking about both right now.
Yeah, why don't
Visions and all
go,
this sort of
go
things.
for it, because we brought it up. I think we're not making any decisions here today about what the setback's gonna be. We're just trying to frame the conversation with the public, so share those, go ahead.
Okay, I agree. I think we have a vision. And for the implementation, I think we can I think we have to be creative, because I don't want to just, I want Cleveland to be full of light and shadow. I want people to be able to sit on a patio in Cleveland and be in the sunshine. So I don't want 6-story buildings right up to the sidewalk. And so I think those view corridors that Jason spoke about are really important. And that, I think someone told me down in Gastown, owners of buildings could trade height they didn't want to, so they could sell it. So to get that mixed sort of height,
Those systems in there.
like thinking about putting those systems in place. So if I only want to go up 2 or 3 stories on Cleveland, I can sell my last story, let's say we go to 4 or whatever, to someone else who wants to go to 5 or 6, right? And so I'm not giving anything away. I'll get paid for that by another developer, because I can sell that density. And so maybe that's one tool we use to sort of get variable heights, because the problem I have with the C4 zoning all down Cleveland is just creates just a monoculture of building. And that's why I love the downtown neighborhood plan, because it anticipates different forms. And so I don't, that's why I was looking for some ideas from staff about how we would do this in the same kind of way. I think ultimately our goal was to enhance downtown for everybody and enhance the value of properties for owners, because we're going to build amazing public realms. But I like Patty. I'm just confused about how we separate what Cleveland looks like from the other bylaw. I remember thinking on last Tuesday night, I wish we'd step back from both of them at the same time so we could bring them both forward.
I meant to do that. I just got back from Mexico and my brain. On my
Where the
brain.
medicine fall.
Because I think in trying to show people what we're trying to do with downtown, we have to be able to show this. And so if we don't engage around the height bylaw with the setback bylaw, we're only going to create a bit of a picture. And for those folks that are, sitting at Pemberton and Cleveland, that will be impacted sort of by both, that's sort of our gateway. That's important, I think, for them to understand how they're involved in this whole picture of downtown. Because we had people last Tuesday night speaking about, I don't even know if I'm supposed to be here, but I did want them there because I think it's important that they hear the vision for all of downtown and why we might live at height or have variable heights down Cleveland. So there's a piece here where we can't just separate the 2 bylaws. I can understand why we would move further faster on one of them, but I think the owners that are impacted on Cleveland should be invited to some of these conversations as well, just so they understand what we're trying to do.
Okay, we're running out of time, guys, so I'll ask you to.
I'll keep it quick. Just on the discussion of interface and viewscapes and the view corridors, we always get these drawings and renderings, but we don't ever get 3D CAD models that would show shading and things like that. Can we request those or demand those from developers so that we can actually see what it's going to look like in the neighborhood? We can rotate that view. We can see where the shadows are going to fall. And that allows us to have a much more full picture of what the whole neighborhood is going to look like.
And we did a little pilot project a few
Yeah.
years ago.
But I don't think that it's that cost prohibitive for a developer to make a 3D CAD model that they can bring in and just spin for us up here, so that we can actually get a really good picture of what it's going to look like and how it's going to affect the neighborhood and all of those corridors. You can turn the whole thing 360 and say, there, that's our view from this side, that's our view from this side. And I think that will allow not only us, but the public to understand better how these are going to affect the neighborhood.
It goes back to Ted's pictures.
Yes,
Good one.
I agree. We can ask for those on rezonings and even permits that have variances in them. Right now, it's not really built into our requirement system. So if it's just a straight DP without any variances, then, so
That's
it's
our
just,
current
it has to
system,
meet the bylaw, but we see them quite a bit and the applicants bring those to ADP meetings. The shading analysis, we haven't seen yet, so that's something that we have been asking now, especially on rezonings downtown.
Susan, Ted, Bianca, and then we do need to move on.
Thanks. I find it interesting talking about view corridors when we've changed the OCP for the Manclan Blind Channel and put 6 stories of massive buildings on there. So for me, a density area in an area that is full of infrastructure and needs density, because otherwise we're moving out into green space. I don't mind 6 stories. Saying that sameness, it doesn't have to be, you could have a wall of 6 stories. Everywhere in Europe, every main street in Europe has 6 stories or more often.
They don't Garibaldi or the chief, though.
Yeah, but we don't need view corridors from every corner on every block. We need a retail, commercial, density area where we have people in our downtown that are using shops and services, so we have employment and all the good reasons of density that every urban planner is speaking about these days. Everything that you spoke about at the chamber, building within infrastructure, building height and density. It can be different colors, different architecture types, there's a lot of ways that we can achieve the same things with density and sameness. And we speak about sameness like it's an evil thing, but it doesn't have to be a horrible thing. It can be a good thing that we have living space and mixed density and commercial space, because it brings people to the shops in the downtown. There are bigger issues with parking and walkability, and those are all separate issues. But allowing architects to do amazing things is the ADP's job. And, like the ADP looks at things and can make suggestions, and maybe there's bylaws we can do that, like a visioning exercise like that. But, talking about view corridors in the one area that we need density and commercial space is difficult for me, because we've not only changed our vision and our shading by changing our OCP for the Manclan Blind Channel and allowing 6 floors everywhere else, and then saying that our one commercial area is going to be restricted. I
don't want to be misleading here, because we haven't changed the OCP for the Manclan Blind Channel.
It was
For 10 years.
industrial land, and we changed it into residential. It's full residential
It's always
with 6
been that,
floors.
but we didn't
6
change the density. And
Well, we
I've been
made
on
OCP amendments. That is basically, and we've allowed 6 floors on the Manclan Blind Channel, and it's housing, it's not employment land. So we still need places for density and employment.
I just want to make sure we're talking about, and I think everyone is looking for density. I don't think anyone's talking against density at all. Ted and Bianca, and then we're going to move on to the other.
Yeah, thanks. Well, the road corridors are view corridors. I mean, the roads are view corridors. I think also, the scope that we're looking at, or if that's the right word, I think we should make sure we hook up to the corridor trail. Like when we're looking at all this, especially if you're looking at setbacks and stuff, I think we should go all the way down. And I know it's probably...
That's in the Africa Transportation Plan already, Ted, so let's focus in on
Well, yeah,
on
just
public
as
engagement.
long as we get the proper connections when we're doing this.
That's
Okay,
in,
I just-
that's in
just
the
a
Africa
comment.
Transportation
And then
Plan.
another thing I found kind of interesting is how many people at the meeting were from out of town. Oh, I live in Vernon, I got 400 feet of frontage.
And they've owned it for
Never
a long
been here,
time.
I haven't been here in 20 years.
Good. Bianca?
All right, thank you very much for having me at today's meeting. I really appreciate the invitation. So I'm here with the Downtown Squamish Business Improvement Association. And just to echo what Ted was saying is we're not talking about an expansive area. It's only a few blocks, so let's bring it down a level, right? The reason I'm here today is also echoing Karen is, you heard from property owners the other day. I don't only hear from property owners, I also hear from members who are also tenants. And they weren't engaged at all in that conversation on Thursday. So you heard from property owners that I'm sorry, was it Tuesday? Sorry, on Tuesday. Days are just blending it together. So we had property owners coming out, but we didn't have any tenants. So the whole conversation is that we need to have stakeholder engagement. And so we're the Downtown BIA, and having an off sort of camera conversation with the Chamber of Commerce, well, of course, we do have to have the Chamber of Commerce involved. They kind of had a hands-off approach because they said, well, it's the downtown BIA catchment. Let's hear what the downtown BIA has to say. Now, just so you understand, we're not a political organization. We're not here to take sides. We're here to inform our membership. So one of the things that we have from our last board meeting the other day was we'll be sending you an email or an official letter requesting that moving forward, whenever there's any development coming to first reading, the downtown BIA would like to request that we be told about that. We have put in a request before, but now it's kind of more important now that we find out what is happening in our downtown area so that we can tell property owners and tenants alike of what's going on. So thank you so much for letting me come here. And yeah, so if you could give us more information on this so that we could pass it on to both the property owners and the tenants in our membership, then we could perhaps disengage them from coming. We do want them to have, you know, their say at the mic, but we would love to have been able to tell them about what was going on. But thank you very much for this process.
Thanks, Bianca. So I think we talked a little bit about the who, and I think it is a broader community. There's specific stakeholders, but it really is the communities downtown. We talked a lot about the what, and certainly our perspectives of the what. Specifically in terms of the how, has staff at this point actually come up with an engagement strategy, or is that yet to come, or what's the next step in terms of?
We're putting together the different pieces. We have more details around exactly what we will do to reach the property owners and the tenants and the residents and all the stakeholders. We'd like to reach as many stakeholders downtown as we can. And then how to reach those property owners that might be not in town and might not be able to make the trip. So we'll try and hit both. Essentially, we're looking to doing workshops and then a survey of some sort to the property owners that can't be here.
Not just property owners?
Yes, but property owners are most likely the ones who will want to be engaged even though they can't be here.
Yeah, and within that, other relevant groups, I mean, the Trail Society might want to comment on the active transportation side, you know, just to make sure we're being inclusive.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's pretty good for that. So you're going to come out with we're going to unveil a strategy on, like an actual program to engage. Great. All right, do you want to move on to the agenda?
And just one last thing, we would like to do this in essentially in early April because there is that development pressure, and so I think it's important to start the discussion.
We don't want to. Our intention is not to put a stall on this. We want to get this out there. We want to do this. We want to be proactive and engage. So do you have a clarification?
Yeah. A clarification. Well, I basically, can we pull back first reading so that we can move?
I've got that on the list.
Okay,
We'll discuss that and decide the pros and cons of it. We certainly can't do it in committee, so.
Yep.
But let's.
We can move it forward in committee and then move it forward. We can't put it.
I'll go to Robin. I'll let Robin deal with the legislative side of things, but, Jonas, do you want to move on with the conversation?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so the second part of this discussion is the in-stream applications that we have right now. We have the new active transportation plan. We've got the downtown neighborhood plan vision. We just talked about the need to get in front of it. And we at the same time have an elevated level of development downtown. So we have about 10 applications, either a DP or a rezoning. Some of
Now, I'd
which,
just like to point out that 2 years ago we had 0.
yes,
Having some and 0, I'd rather have some.
exactly.
Plus 10 are through.
Plus, well, not 10, 4 or something. But anyway, go on.
So maybe we can go to the next slide. Here's just a list of applications that we won't, I hope that we don't have to talk about each one of them. I don't have the details.
We are not.
Some of the development permits may have a variance, some don't. Essentially, we have 10 of them, and there's a couple of things that we could do. So there's two options that we've outlined. One is the status quo, which is what we would recommend we do, which is basically working with the applicants to encourage them to meet voluntarily the vision and the goals of the active transportation plan and the downtown neighborhood plan. When there's a DP, there's obviously more leverage that district would have. On the rezoning applications, absolutely, then that would be the standard. And, you know, the standard gets less as you go into development permits that don't have any variances. The other option is an interim pause. Again, I think we could only pause applications that either are rezoning or have a variance built into them. There's some negative aspects of it that sends a message, a certain message out. And then also it will incentivize developments to just meet the current standard and take out all the variances, which I think is not necessarily what the district or what would be benefiting the community. So those are the two options for council's discussion.
Go ahead, Jason.
Option one.
What's that?
Option one.
Status quo. Okay. Any other, I think, does everyone understand what the pros and cons are for status quo versus basically a moratorium?
So the main, which we,
You are, why?
Well, we're picking an option that affects me.
You have an application process in that list?
Well, not really.
Then no, you don't have.
Not really. Yeah, not really,
Yes
or no?
Well,
Was it on the list? Do you have an application in
my
process?
application is deceased
No.
right now.
There's a deceased
There is no
application,
application.
therefore there's no application. Okay.
so the Maine, which was at Maine and Cleveland, they increased their setbacks voluntarily. They had C4 zoning, so they didn't have to, correct? So we have evidence that developers are willing to adjust based on feedback. And so I think I would choose I don't really want to call it status quo, because we are getting them to try and change.
Yes.
But
it's the approach that we use now.
yeah, and I think that makes sense. And I think there's openness to actually, to get council's feedback. I've certainly chatted with a few developers, and I don't think they want to bring forward things that, with our discretion, we're just going to kind of send back to the drawing board. So I think there's actually appetite to listen to the feedback that council has been giving, and work with staff to put forward something that actually is as close as possible to the bylaws. So I'm fairly confident that the status quo option it will work. And I think we should move these bylaws forward as quickly as we can.
Ted?
I think the only people that will affect is the people that are in interim sales, so they're like in the middle of selling their property. The proposed amendments reduce parking. So to Susan's point, if we pull first reading, we're going to put everyone back to regular parking. If we leave first reading in, then it'll be the new parking, which reduces the number of units, which is money to everybody. So anyway,
I'm not sure that's
I'm okay with
correct.
status quo. I mean, we will get a little more attention on status quo than laws.
So just, I'm not sure what you said, but I think the parking discussion has to be part of this whole comprehensive conversation that we're having about these bylaws. Just so we're clear, first reading is essentially presenting a draft. If there's a dramatic change, pulling first reading, redoing first reading can be done. If there's just amendments that need to happen to the first reading, second reading will have those amendments and we'll consider basically an amended first reading in a second reading. So, I mean, a first reading is not written in stone by any means. It is really just a draft of something that can be added to, amended, changed. If it's wholesale change, then you can repeal and put a new one down, but it's just a starting point, a launching point for the bylaw. And that's, I mean, I think sometimes we got distracted because we've dealt with first and second reading all the time at the same time. And really, the way readings are intended is, here's the draft, here's the introduction of the bylaw, feedback, changes happen, second reading comes with changes. That's what's presented to the public for the public hearing. And we kind of got away from that by always simply paying first and second readings for it. So. Robin, do you want to add to that?
And I'll just add to that, Mayor Heisman, you're correct. So by rescinding second reading, you are giving direction to staff. They can bring forward a suite of amendments and you're okay. I think council's where you want to be. You're already in a good place by pulling it back to first reading, because now staff, you don't have to repeal or rescind first reading unless you want to kill the bylaw. But in this case, there's some history with what we've done so far, and I think you want to retain that for the file and keep that going. So by being at first reading right now, staff have the direction. They can bring back an amended second reading, and hopefully it's inclusive of the intent of the discussion.
And I think there is a communications piece around really articulating the intention of this versus people reading it and not understanding it. And clarity is really what we need to get into.
Thank you. I have problems with the status quo because there's so much missing out of the bylaw that doesn't, for me, the biggest thing is, do we want a wall of parking? With the amendments that we have right now, it basically requires the ground floor and the second floor to be parking, and with severe restrictions in density. So I don't know, with restrictions in density, how you overcome, that's the biggest thing for me, is restricting it to 2 floors, and basically saying, you can come back with all these new ideas, but it's going to create the same problems as...
So let's clarify what status quo is. Status quo is not the new bylaws. Status quo is our current bylaws.
Status
Not the new
quo
bylaws.
is pursuing the goals of the downtown neighborhood plan and active transportation. So asking for those second-story office space, asking to meet the setback as much as
within
possible.
6 floors of...
That's what the zoning
Within
allows
6
for.
floors? Or-
Yes, within 6
Yeah,
floors.
that's, okay, thank you.
So that's what
But
status
we're not
quo
in
is.
status
That's what
quo with the first reading of a bylaw that says 2 floors.
No.
Okay, perfect, yeah, I'd agree with status quo.
The
With
alternative
all-
is moratorium,
Yeah,
and only things come back without variances,
no, I'm happy with
in
status.
which case you're not going to get a whole bunch of the things that we're trying to get
Yeah.
at. So that's the difference between a moratorium versus where we're at.
Okay, just quickly,
Pete, now we gotta-
so if people are bringing forward 6-story buildings on Cleveland, we can ask them in the status quo option for viewscapes, shading, all those things we talked about.
In most cases, yes, because most applications will include a variance or it'll be a rezoning.
Okay, and my second question is, can we put moratorium on accepting any new applications until our bylaws are through? So instead of compounding the problem, we take what's in stream and we keep working with those, but then we go, okay, everybody else now needs to wait a little bit till we put this new bylaw in place. So we don't get more of these sort of half-baked proposals because people are trying to get in front of these bylaws. And
So you're talking about all new applications, not just one, all new applications.
well,
Right.
My sense is that we've got quite a few applications, we have 10 that we're already working on, that there's probably more that are gonna come in, and so if we sort of said, like we did this in Brackendale, we've done this before, right? Just put a pause for a couple of months until we get the bylaw where we want it to be, and then accept new applications. And I'm,
Can we say no more new applications until the OCP
I
is?
would have to ask the lawyer.
I doubt.
It's a
Yeah.
different situation with the Chikai because that was life safety. And until we figured out what we were going to do with the mitigation. That's what that pause was specific to, and we can do that. There's not really a life safety aspect to this one.
And if people are gonna,
downtown's ugly, I'll die.
if people are gonna, if we have a system that allows them to work towards fundamentally what our intention or our goals are, then I don't necessarily want to. I know, I kind of understand. Pete?
And I think to that point, can you just clarify for me on status quo bullet point 2 where it says proposed bylaw amendments as much as possible? How do you define that? Because there's going to, people are going to try to go to the one side and not the other.
Yeah,
How do
so
we
I think
define that?
It refers to those challenges that we heard at the public hearing for smaller lots downtown and corner lots. They might not, we might need to do some more design work and thinking with the community about how to meet the goals. And so in those cases, we might lose a lane of parking or something like that. They might not be able to meet the exact goal that we're going for. Because our goal, we haven't yet figured out how we're going to implement it. On the larger lots, I think it's much easier, like the main, to meet those goals.
Okay, so we're running out of time, we're impinging on our special business meeting. I think I'm hearing status quo, we want to work with the developers to make sure we're making an awesome downtown within the scope of what the downtown neighborhood plan draft is sort of articulating, and then we'll fine tune it. Anything else?
That's it.
Do you need a motion to that effect, or is,
Well, can we get clarification, because I know several of you wanted to combine the height back into it, and I didn't get a clear idea of whether we needed to.
I just don't know in public engagement, we can divorce the whole vision for downtown and take out just Cleveland's height. I think it's one whole comprehensive conversation, two bylaws, and there's gonna be more than just what's in the bylaws, I think, that's gonna come out of the conversation. It's a comprehensive conversation. So I don't
So
think
we will limit the conversation, or try and focus the conversation on height on Cleveland. Because, so we are coming back with the downtown neighborhood plan to do that community engagement on the neighborhood by neighborhood basis, which I think will talk about all of the downtown neighborhood plan and all of downtown.
Yeah, sure, that's fine, but I'm not sure it's necessary to parcel it out. I mean, we're talking about downtown. Through public engagement, I'm not sure, I mean, you want to focus the conversation so you're being productive, but I don't think you're going to limit it too much, you know what I mean?
So if we could just then agree that we're focusing on Cleveland when
For
it
the
comes
height
to
piece.
height piece, yes. Because that's the initiative that we've already started, essentially. And I think the rest of it, regulating the height downtown and density bonusing, that will have to come with the zoning bylaw
Okay,
rewrite.
okay. That makes sense?
I like what you were saying, Patty, more than, I really, the whole idea of restricting one street outside, that's the entire point of why we had the public so angry at us, is just picking one street out of a comprehensive thing. It's my very first conversation is it's got to be done comprehensively. It's 5 streets, because it's going to change everything. You can't have towering buildings over Cleveland Avenue and say.
I actually don't know how you divorce out the two conversations,
I don't know.
but certainly it's specific to Cleveland at this point, but I don't think you're going to divorce Cleveland from the comprehensive conversation about heights in the downtown and viewscapes in the downtown, and so.
3D
I don't think
mapping as
you're-
well is.
I mean, looking for specific feedback on that particular bylaw, that's one thing, but I don't think you're going to be able to quash the comprehensive conversation.
Well, I think we might use it as a case study, use Cleveland as a case study to then learn from it and apply it to the rest of downtown. But I don't think if we try and roll this all up into one, it will
You'll get
become a huge exercise.
I think we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, because we're prejudging the outcome, but I think good conversation makes everybody.
That's cool.
Okay, do you don't need a resolution, that was just mostly to get feedback?
No, we just want to get
Finish
feedback. We
this off?
want to, the second part of this was really important for us dealing with the applicants,
Okay, great,
because we want to make sure that the council, we've got endorsement of council.
okay, fantastic,
Thank you.
appreciate it, thank you very much. That's it for this meeting, right? Okay, motion to terminate, Jason, Ted, all those in favor, opposed, motion carries.